The main character picks up a large red tomato and, admiring its rich color, suddenly becomes upset because it is too sour. The young man thinks that next time he should grow a much sweeter crop, but at that moment someone turns to him. A beautiful girl with cute ears tied in a ponytail appears before him and calls him Isagi. She says that everyone is already gathered and is just waiting for him, holding a basket full of large and ripe red tomatoes in her right hand. The young man turns his head in her direction, looks closely, and agrees with her words, saying that he will join them right now. Inside, Isagi thinks with excitement that this time he will definitely be able to achieve a better life and make his dream a reality. Romaris Empire, Romaris Castle. The corridors of the majestic fortress are surrounded by numerous warriors in luxurious armor. The man addresses the boy by his name. He coldly declares that from this day forward, he is removing him from his position as court alchemist. The young man's eyes widen in surprise, and he looks at the man with incomprehension. Isagi is confused and asks why he made such a decision, since the boy thinks he is doing a great job. His interlocutor is surprised that he even dared to ask about it. The man says in a cold voice that the main duty of a court alchemist is to create magical weapons for war. The young man looks at him with a frightened expression on his face. He continues, stating that the boy is neglecting his duties and is just messing around in the dirt. In his hands is a scroll, which he holds with an indifferent look. This is the head of the Imperial Alchemy department, Garius. The guy disagrees with him and replies that this is not just digging around in the ground. Isagi slides his right hand into the sleeve of his kaftan, and the head of the department carefully watches his actions. The young man takes out a small bag and shows it, holding it tightly in his hand. He insists on looking and says that he uses alchemy to grow crops. Excitedly pointing at the bags in his hand, with anger on his face, he declares that he is breeding varieties that can germinate even on completely barren lands. The man dismissively replies that this is nonsense, because if there is no food, it should simply be taken by force. He rests his chin on one hand and stretches the other forward, thinking that this method is much more effective. The boy, trembling with anger, clutches the bag of seeds in his left hand so tightly that his fingers turn white. He thinks he's tired of enduring all this. The Romaris Empire is a militaristic state that gained greatness through aggression and conquest, so it invests the lion's share of its human resources in military affairs. However, the young man is convinced that such irresponsible policies only make people suffer. He remembers the hungry children on the streets and realizes that he wanted to save this country by solving the food problem with alchemy. The head of the Imperial Alchemy department stands up abruptly, his hands on the table, and declares that he has been avoiding work by cultivating fields even within the castle, but that this arbitrariness has come to an end. Isagi asks if he has really been removed from his post. The young man thinks of himself as having always followed the established norm, but realizes that as an orphan, he remains in their eyes only a worthless boy, looked down upon. Isagi is still convinced that he did what he had to do. He believes that alchemy does not exist to kill people, but to bring them happiness. Isagi looks at his now former boss with incredible fury in his eyes. Garius, turning away, tells him that he is free. The man turns his whole body and looks at the young man with cold, indifferent eyes. He says dryly that alchemists must silently obey orders and have no right to their own opinions. The boy looks at him contemptuously, thinking that the boss sees alchemists only as soulless tools. He says calmly that he understood everything and accepted the order. The protagonist walks through a deserted city, among silent houses, and finally enters a building with a sign indicating that it is Isagi's workshop. He takes off his outerwear at the door. At that moment, the girl again addresses him as Mr. Isagi and greets him warmly, wishing him good morning. A cute girl with ears and a tail behind her asks him how his day was. Smiling, she holds a wooden tray covered with a cloth. She is a member of the animal race named Mercia. Isagi looks at her with sadness in his eyes and enters the room, throwing his jacket over his right arm. He is genuinely surprised that she is already here. Mercia is a court maid, and in her free time she helps him in the workshop. The boy recalls their shared moments and working side by side. Together, they researched ways to create crops that could grow on depleted lands. The hero sits heavily on a chair and sighs, and the girl notices his condition and becomes confused. She worries that something is bothering him and looks at him with anxiety in her eyes. The girl asks what happened, but the hero suddenly falls silent. He then begins to explain the whole situation to her in a sad voice, telling her the truth. Mercia exclaims in surprise, not understanding how this is even possible. She erupts in anger and says that Mr. Isagi worked for the good of the empire. Unable to accept this, she clutches a sheet of paper in her right hand and leans on the table with the other. The guy is confused by her overreaction and tries to calm her down by holding out his hands in a conciliatory gesture. but Mercia is still irritated and asks him if he's angry himself. The hero quietly replies that he would be lying if he said he wasn't angry at all. But for him, it's enough that she recognized him. He adds that on the other hand, it is even good. Mercia looks at him in surprise, and the young man sincerely thanks her for her concern. Being an orphan, he remained alone for a long time. Smiling, the boy puts his hand on her chest and says he's glad she's his friend. The girl blushes and gently calls him by his name. She asks in an anxious voice what he will do now. The guy awkwardly scratches his cheek with his left index finger and admits that he didn't expect to be fired, so he doesn't have any plans yet. The protagonist touches his chin with 2 fingers in thought and wonders whether he will be welcome back at the orphanage and whether he will be able to work and live there. The girl listens attentively. Her cheeks turn red. She crosses her arms over her chest and asks herself what to do next. Suddenly, an idea appears in the girl's head, and she hesitantly suggests that he go to her native land. The hero turns his head towards her in surprise, looks at her with confusion, and asks again, not understanding what exactly she means. Mercia blushes violently, holds her hands out and says she didn't mean anything like that at all. She explains that she's only suggesting a change of scenery, while her ears droop and her tail wags tensely from the intense emotion. Isagi frowns slightly, considering her words. He raises his hand to his chin, thinking intently about her suggestion that they go to her homeland for a change of scenery. The hero says that he remembers. Her homeland is the Beast Kingdom. In his imagination, a map of the Remurius Empire and the Beast Kingdom appears, where over 80% of the population are beastmen. The girl confirms and adds that it is just a small village on the outskirts. Isagi thanks her for the invitation, but looks uncertain, wondering if he would be useful there. Mercia suddenly jumps closer and exclaims that he is definitely needed, without a moment's hesitation. She crosses her arms over her chest, frowns, and says in a serious tone that if there were an alchemist like him in the village, everything would change for the better. The boy looks at her in surprise, struck by her words, and quietly says her name. Mercia says that although their village is rich in natural resources, the food problem only gets worse every year. Her memories come back to her hometown, the dense forests, mountains, and animals that live there. The young man recalls that when she first wanted to help him with his research, she talked about the desire to make people's lives easier by creating crops that can grow even on poor soils. The hero remembers how he promised to send the new seed to his native Mercia as soon as he was finished. He looks thoughtfully at the bag of grain lying next to him on the table. Isagi realizes that he has only recently finished working on this culture and has collected a lot of data. He clasps his hands over his mouth and thinks deeply, while the girl watches him with confusion in her eyes. The boy touches his chin, frowns, and thinks about how to make these plants grow easily in any soil. Suddenly he says he understands. Mercia looks at him in surprise. The young man abruptly grabs the bag from the table and turns his head to the girl standing next to him. With a confident look and furrowed eyebrows, he says that he will go to her homeland. The protagonist opens his arms in the rays of light and looks at her with determination in his eyes. He says that perhaps they will be able to use the crops they have grown. Then he smiles and adds that if they can achieve food abundance, their success can be spread to the whole world. The girl comes closer, returns the same sincere smile, and thanks him. However, after a moment, her smile disappears. She remains worriedly silent, and then asks if he is really sure about this decision. The guy looks at her in surprise, not understanding her anxiety. The girl covers her mouth with her hand in embarrassment and looks away. She says that she thinks that with his abilities and the varieties he has bred, he would be useful in any country. The young man, confused, reminds her that it was she who invited him. Mercia is embarrassed, blushes slightly, and apologizes for her suggestion, admitting that she said it too hastily, under the influence of emotion. The boy replies that it is better to accept help from a neighbor than to remain tied hand and foot, doing nothing. He extends his hand to her and adds that by acting freely, they will be able to change the empire. The hero, smiling, places his right hand on his chest and says that she helped him not only with his research, but also always supported him, so as a sign of gratitude, he seeks to help her. He asks if he can't do it. Tears well up in Mercia's eyes, which she wipes away with her left hand. Then the hero says that he will pack his things and go to the Beast Kingdom. The girl agrees with a smile. She, blushing slightly, says that she will also leave and quit her job then. Smiling, he takes out a large bag, starts packing his things and agrees, saying that they will meet later. The girl is about to leave, humming a melody to herself. But suddenly the young man understands the meaning of her words and freezes, staring at her in amazement. Isagi suddenly runs out of the workshop and calls out loudly, asking her to wait. The girl, who has already stepped out onto the city street, looks back at his voice and stops in shock. The hero doesn't believe that she really wants to break free and go with him. Mercia confirms her words and says that she can't leave him alone. The young man anxiously asks if she is really sure she wants to leave her job. He reminds her that the service in the palace is prestigious and the salary is considerable. The girl answers him with a smile. Her face turns slightly red. She touches her chin with her palm and, squinting, says gently that now he worries about her just as she worried about him recently. The hero sighs with relief, looking at her, and suggests they go together. The girl agrees to his words without hesitation. A few days later, they leave the city, passing through a gate, past which a carriage with a driver passes. The girl suggests they leave in peace and asks if he needs anything else. Isagi agrees. The main character, with a slight smile, says in a calm voice that he has already put both water and food in the magic bag, so there are no problems. The girl holds the straps of a large backpack behind her shoulders and looks displeasedly at the strangely shaped alchemical bag that holds much more things than it seems from the outside. Mercia says that the journey to the Beast Kingdom will take about a month. It will be a long and difficult journey, but she suggests that they enjoy it. The boy looks sadly at the castle beyond the walls and agrees. Isagi admires the view through the round window with a smile, and next to her, the girl, her mouth slightly parted in surprise, also smiles. Two men ride next to them, one of whom is reading a book, holding it in his hands. On September 12th and 17th, they walk through the city. The protagonist looks at the girl and points forward with his index finger at the majestic tower that rises directly in front of them. On September 28th, they set up camp in the countryside and build a small fire lined with rocks. Mercia sits by the fire, and Isagi hands her a mug of steaming hot drink. On October 7th, they are again on the road in the carriage. Mercia tries to wake the boy, gently calling him to wake up. Isagi reluctantly opens his eyes and sees the silhouette of his friend through the darkness. The girl tells the hero that they have arrived. Isagi rubs his eyes with his left hand and stares out the window with a sleepy gaze at the landscape that has opened up before him. The protagonist opens his eyes in surprise and exclaims that this is the homeland of Mercia. He sees bustling streets full of beastmen. This is the Beast Kingdom, the village of Plumina. When they land, the boy is amazed by the large number of beastmen and looks around in confusion. Although they are on the outskirts, this is still the heart of the Beast Kingdom. Isagi and Mercia stare at them. They see a burly warrior bull smiling, carrying a bucket of water in his left hand, while holding a pole with other buckets on his shoulder. Behind him, a girl is pulling hard on a rope tied to a stubborn goat. A little further on, a woman examines the merchant's shovel. Nearby, a boy with rabbit ears holds a cage with a rooster and notices the newcomers in surprise, while a girl nearby tries to catch a chicken. Mercia invites him to her house. The boy refuses and asks if he should greet the elder first, as he might be surprised by the sudden appearance of a stranger. The girl asks not to worry, because the elder is her father. She seriously places her right hand on her chest, and the hero exclaims in surprise and loudly, asking questions. He says she should have told him sooner. Mercia apologizes with a smile and closed eyes, explaining that she wanted to surprise him. The boy asks what he should do now, admitting that he is worried. Isagi is afraid that he will be refused, saying that alchemists are not needed here. The girl calms him down, assuring him that everything is fine. Mercia clenches her fist seriously and angrily says that if her father says such things, she will hit him and teach him a lesson. Behind her, the hero wonders confusedly if he heard correctly that she really wants to hit her father. The girl waves her hand in the direction of her house and calls Isagi to follow her. He follows, and in a moment they stop in front of a large house. Mercia says they are there. This is her house. Before entering, she turns to him and says she will talk to her parents first. He agrees and says he understands. The girl puts her hand on the doorknob. Suddenly, a woman jumps out with a smile, happily welcoming her return. She exclaims that Mercia is finally home. The girl calls her mom and asks her not to scare her like that anymore. The boy looks at this in surprise. The hero is shocked when he enters Mercia's house. Before him stands an angry man with an unkind look. Isagi immediately realizes that this is the girl's father and feels hostility from him. The man invites him to sit on the bench across from him and his wife, next to Mercia. Isagi politely thanks him and sincerely apologizes for the trouble. The boy hesitantly, stammering a little, says that he is pleased to meet you. He explains that he has come from the Remurius Empire and introduces himself as the alchemist Isagi. But suddenly Mercia's father interrupts and shouts for him to be quiet. The boy is frightened and looks at him in surprise. The man angrily says that he will not give his daughter to the first stranger he comes across. The hero exclaims in confusion, not understanding his words. The elder shouts again, calling Mercia his dearest daughter and Isagi a random stranger. But suddenly Mercia's mother interrupts her husband and, smiling, says that she likes the boy. The husband stops shouting and asks his wife in surprise. The hero is embarrassed by the situation and apologizes. Mercia's mother is happy that her daughter has finally brought her husband home and assumes that she has already decided everything. Mercia jumps up abruptly, surprising everyone. She blushes and, clutching the hem of her dress, exclaims that this is not true, because she wanted to introduce Isagi as a new resident of their village. Her father looks at his trembling daughter, and the boy beside him in surprise. The wife smiles awkwardly, and the husband blushes and asks to start over. He calls himself the village headman of Kelsey. The headman asks if the boy really wants to live in their village. Isagi smiles good-naturedly and answers in the affirmative, adding that he would like to be allowed to practice alchemy here. Mercia's parents are silent, not understanding his words. The father opens his mouth slightly, and the mother frowns. The boy looks at them anxiously, not knowing what is happening. Mercia guesses that her parents don't know what alchemy is at all. Isagi looks at her in surprise. The man scratches the back of his head and admits that it's true. Now everything becomes clear to Isagi. He asks if they have ever met alchemists. The girl explains that alchemists are very rare in these parts, so the hero decides to explain to them who they are. He explains with a smile that alchemists are people who control matter with magical power. They are able to manipulate and radically change the structure of materials with the help of magic. He thinks that creating material that is radically different from the original is very difficult, but it is an extremely practical art. The girl's parents frown and silently consider his words. The girl suggests that it is too complicated for them to understand, and thinks it would be quicker to show alchemy in practice. The boy agrees and says that she is right. The protagonist approaches Kelsey and asks him to borrow the sword hanging from his belt. The man looks at the weapon and agrees. The young man begins to examine it carefully. Kelsey asks his opinion and says it's a beautiful manatite blade he recently bought. But the guy says there's no manatite in this dagger. The man asks again indignantly. The hero explains that alchemists have the ability to see the true nature of materials. This low-quality metal, only similar to manatite, is called nomatite. In her mind, the girl imagines a merchant selling counterfeit weapons, deceiving people into believing they have magical powers. The man is very upset because the blade cost him 20 silver coins. The guy takes off his gloves, still holding the sword, and says in a confident voice that everything is okay, because he will be able to reforge it into a real manatite dagger. Mercia's mother asks in surprise, not believing her ears. Her father, amazed, says that he really wants to turn this blade into a precious material, and asks how he will do it. The protagonist picks up the sword, and a magic circle appears around him. The weapon begins to glow, and the girl's parents watch his actions in amazement. The boy thinks that the shape and weight of the blade should be changed first. He concentrates on reshaping it, performing numerous magic manipulations. The hero smiles sincerely and hands the girl's parents the magically transformed dagger, saying that everything is ready. The man takes the weapon in his hands and asks in surprise if it is really a manatite dagger. Isagi asks him to pass a stream of magical energy through it. He exclaims in surprise. Kelsey channels the power through his new weapon, his jaw dropping in surprise, his eyes widening. He stares at the dagger in astonishment. He notices a target on the wall behind the protagonist and, putting all his strength into it, abruptly throws the weapon, saying that he wants to test it. The dagger successfully hits its target, but to the headman's surprise, it pierces through and leaves a hole in the wall. The man looks out the window and exclaims when he sees the dagger stuck in the ground outside. Kelsey blushes awkwardly and says with a smile that it's cool. Behind him, his wife puts a hand on his shoulder with a fake smile and sternly asks what he's doing. The man turns to his wife and is a little scared. He mumbles uncertainly that he didn't think he was that strong. His wife has a menacing aura, clenches her fists, and tells him not to make excuses. Kelsey apologizes. The hero is stunned and a little confused. He apologizes and says that he should have warned them in advance, because he can't fix something like this quickly. Isagi takes a piece of wood from behind his back. After a while, the wall looks whole again, and the target hangs in its place. The girl enthusiastically says that it's cool, and the hero thanks her. He detaches the piece of wood from the log with magic. He explains that alchemists are capable of such things, but above all, he seeks to apply alchemy to agriculture. The man seriously says that this land is barren and it is useless to work here. The hero replies in surprise that he knows this. Isagi adds that this is why the resources of the mountains and forests are also decreasing. The man, confused, asks why he came here then, knowing this. The protagonist looks resolutely at the headman. He places his left hand on his chest and says with inspiration that he came here to improve the food situation through alchemy. Kelsey touches his chin and looks at him intently. The boy explains that he heard from Mercia about the situation in the village and wants to make it possible to grow crops even on poor soil using alchemically enhanced seeds. Isagi adds that he wants to reduce the number of hungry people, even if it's just by one. The man ponders his words. Suddenly, Mercia stands up decisively and says that if nothing changes, the riches of the mountains and forests will disappear. The girl confidently looks at her parents and loudly asks for the sake of the village's future to allow her to engage in farming using Mr. Isagi's alchemy. Kelsey closes his eyes and smiles slightly. He says he doesn't exactly believe it, but he thinks there's a chance. The headman looks at his smiling wife and decides to give him permission. The hero is shocked and confused, his jaw dropping in surprise. Mercia smiles gratefully nearby. They both sincerely thank her parents. The husband looks at his wife, who is writing something on a scroll, and says that Isagi needs his own home. They are going to give him a house with a large plot of land. The wife passes the scroll to her daughter. She orders Mercia to take Isagi to a vacant house. The girl agrees, takes the scroll and, turning to the boy with a smile, calls him to come with her. He felt constrained in the palace, but here he can finally do what he wants, completely devoting himself to his favorite work. Mercia and Isagi are walking down the street, but from around the corner a girl is watching them, who knows very well who it is. The hero walks alongside the girl. They pass the outskirts of the village and head towards the forest. The young man thinks that with the help of alchemy, he will make life in this village beautiful. They walk along a narrow path among the trees, and the girl says that his home is here now. As he makes his way through the branches, the boy thinks that this is where his new life begins, and looks ahead with foreboding. However, a small old house with a partially collapsed roof appears in front of them. They both look at it with a look of incomprehension. Mercia, holding the scroll in her hands, gapes in surprise and frowns at the shack. Isagi, confused, asks if this is really his new home. The girl says it is a real ruin, and it has a menacing aura about it. She clutches the scroll in her hands with fury, resenting that Mr. Isagi is forced to live in such a terrible place. The boy looks at her a little scared, not understanding such anger. Suddenly he remembers the headman's words that the house is a little old, and says that Kelsey warned him. Mercia turns around and shouts that she won't allow this. Clenching her fists in anger, she wants to leave and tell him everything, but Isagi holds out both hands in a reassuring gesture and tells her that it's okay. The girl turns to him, clearly showing her disagreement. Her gaze is determined. Her eyebrows are furrowed, and her cheeks turn slightly red as she looks at the young man. Isagi clenches his left hand into a fist and exclaims that if a house is uninhabitable, it should be rebuilt. He explains that this is exactly what the alchemist thinks. The guy adds with a smile that he has long dreamed of trying to build his dream house. The girl asks in surprise what he means by dream house. He recalls that when he was a court alchemist, he was despised because of his orphaned background, and so he lived in a workshop that looked more like a warehouse. The hero looks at the shack with a smile and says that he will try to create a home that he will really like. The girl lowers her hands and agrees, although there is a slight sadness in her voice. The protagonist touches the old planks of the house with his gloved hand. He wonders if the wood is really no longer usable. The girl watches his actions intently. He begins to take off his gloves. The guy decides to dismantle this house first. With a determined look and a slight smile, he directs a stream of magic at the structure. A magic circle appears in his palm, and the boy begins to influence the wood. Its structure changes, and the house cracks and sways in different directions. Finally, the structure collapses completely, leaving only a pile of planks. The girl standing behind watches, while the boy wipes the sweat from his forehead and smiles. She looks confused. She picks up a few boards and throws them over her shoulder. Mercia smiles and says she'll put the rest aside. The boy thanks her in a surprised voice, even though he thinks the boards must be heavy. He squats down and starts rummaging through his bag. The hero explains that he wants to remove weeds to prepare the plot. He finds the right thing in the bag and says, "Here it is." From there he takes out a hybrid herbicide. Isagi has used alchemy to qualitatively alter the composition of this product, greatly enhancing and accelerating its effect. He begins spraying it on the grass in the area. The hero says with enthusiasm in his voice that everything is fine and encourages himself and the girl to start building the house. Mercia looks at him and wipes her face from fatigue. The boy takes a large wooden log out of his magic bag and examines it carefully, frowning slightly. The girl takes out another log nearby. She calls out his name in surprise and watches in alarm as Isagi falls to the ground under the weight of the wood, exclaiming loudly. They retrieve the ENT wood he obtained in a battle with the plant monster. The hero touches the tree and summons a magic circle. Using alchemy, he strengthens its strength. Isagi then uses levitation magic, lifting many planks into the air at once. He guides them in this right direction, concentrating on controlling their movements. Controlling the wood, the boy begins to lay the foundation of his new dream home. The girl next to him watches him work, her eyes wide with surprise. Her mouth is slightly open, shocked by what she sees. The guy thinks that now he is no longer limited by anyone. With a frown of concentration, he continues to build his own dream house with magic. This time, he builds the walls, cuts the windows, and begins to cover the roof. He has a perfect plan for the building in his head, which he is happily implementing. He has already installed the doors and is now completing his plans by laying the roof. Isagi exclaims with joy in his voice that everything is ready and opens his arms wide, looking at the beautiful new house. His girlfriend, who is standing nearby, also looks at the building with admiration. The hero shields his eyes from the sun with his right hand to get a better look at the building, and places his left hand on his side. The girl crosses her arms over her chest and, with a twinkle in her eyes, says with admiration that it is wonderful. They take off their shoes and enter the protagonist's new home. The boy is a little embarrassed and asks if he's overdoing it. The girl covers her mouth with her hand, blushing with surprise and admiration. Mercia turns to him with a smile and says that she now understands what his dream house looks like. She touches the kitchen tables as the hero watches her happily. The guy climbs the stairs to the second floor, showing it to the girl. She looks at him in surprise. There they even find a bathroom. The hero says that he will gradually set up a normal workplace later. Isagi asks the girl to help him arrange the furniture. Mercia, with her eyes closed and a smile, replies that he should rely on her. The protagonist takes a single chair out of the bag and realizes with disappointment that it is all they brought. He sighs and places it next to the table, saying that it looks like they have no furniture at all. The girl smiles and says that there is nothing you can do, because there was not enough space in the warehouse. The guy sadly remembers his previous office, which was littered with papers, and agrees with her words. Suddenly, her ear twitches and she hears someone calling her name. Mercia quickly runs out of the house and sees that it is her mother, who has surprised her with her appearance. The woman, covering her mouth with her hand, looks ahead in surprise and asks her daughter if such a wonderful house has really appeared in their village. Mercia explains that Isagi has altered it with alchemy to make it habitable. Mother, surprised, echoes his words and says with admiration that alchemy is truly an incredible thing. The guy looks a little embarrassed, scratches the back of his head with his right hand, and apologizes for changing everything here at his own discretion. The woman holds out her hands in a conciliatory gesture and smiles, saying that's great. She apologizes for the unexpected visit and says she wanted to help clean up so he could move in right away. But, embarrassed, she admits that it looks like the help is no longer needed. The guy replies that he is very pleased with her concern. The woman asks with a smile if she can look inside the house. He smiles too and invites her in. As she enters, she exclaims with delight that this house is incredible. Mercia's mother runs her hand across the table and says that the kitchen is spacious and wonderful. The daughter looks at her calmly, and the hero is silent. Then he suddenly points to the kitchen shelf behind the girl and says that it is too high for her. Mercia looks around in surprise. The girl stands on tiptoe and reaches up with concentration, trying to reach it. She says confidently that if she reaches hard enough, she will reach it. The guy, a little confused, says he'll shorten the shelf and is about to use alchemy when a magic circle appears around his hand. The girl reaches out and grabs the door handle. Mother says that if they put the dishes on display, this kitchen will be even more beautiful than their own. The girl has a new idea, and Isagi, standing nearby, scratches his head in embarrassment. Mercia suddenly exclaims, folds her hands in supplication, and turns to her mother, asking if they have any unnecessary furniture and things that could be brought here. Later, Mercia stands in the middle of the already furnished kitchen with her hands on her hips and says with satisfaction that it really is cozy here now. The guy opens his mouth in surprise. The hero, with a twinkle in his eye, says that it's wonderful and thanks her, because now it really feels like home. The girl turns away and quietly says that she's glad about it. She looks around the room thoughtfully and says that the walls look empty, so she wants to hang something on them. She also thinks about putting a vase on the table. The guy looks at her in surprise, not understanding. The girl tilts her head slightly, and closing her eyes with a smile, suggests they have dinner instead. She takes out a large pot and places it on the table, having previously spread a napkin. Mercia explains that her mother gave them a delicious dish so they can eat. The boy remembers her gratefully. The girl removes the lid from the cauldron with a smile. The hero opens his eyes wide in surprise and exclaims that it looks extremely delicious. He realizes it's milk soup and thinks it's delicious. The girl apologizes for the humble dish, but Isagi smiles and says that's exactly what he dreamed of. She thanks him. Mercia pours a portion of soup onto a tray. It is their specialty, a milky soup made with mountain herbs and mushrooms, and bread from a magic bag is placed next to it. The hero, smiling, takes a spoon and prepares to taste the soup. The girl stands behind him and wishes him a delicious meal. Isagi turns to her in surprise. He asks the girl with concern if she will eat with him. Mercia starts to blush heavily at his words, her tail raising nervously. She turns away and exclaims that she is a servant and cannot sit at the same table with him. The boy looks at her in surprise and explains that they are not in the castle now and no one will punish her. The girl opens her eyes wide and asks if she can really sit next to him. The hero smiles and invites her to have dinner together. The girl folds her arms along her body, tilts her head slightly to the side, blushes and smiles, thanking him for letting her sit next to him. Mercia and Isagi are sitting at a set table with milk soup and bread. The hero laughs and says with a smile that it is strange to see her in front of him. The girl, all aflame with shame, confesses that she feels strange herself. She says that for some reason she can't calm down when he's not around. The guy replies that it's natural and advises her to calm down her excitement. He thanks her again for the food, and the girl accepts his thanks. The hero raises the spoon to his mouth, first blows lightly to cool the soup, and then tastes it. Isagi's eyes widen in surprise, and he exclaims with delight that it is incredibly delicious. He shares his impression, saying that the sweetness of the milk is wonderfully revealed in the mouth. He asks Mercia what the grass in his spoon is called. She explains that it is creek cook grass, which often grows in the nearby woods. It is a wild plant, but, the girl adds, it is really very tasty. The hero thinks that the stem is crunchy and the boiled leaves are soft. He imagines this herb and assumes that it would be delicious both boiled and fried. He also tastes the mushrooms and the saltiness of the bacon, which combine perfectly with the delicate milky sweetness. The guy tastes each product, imagining them together. He bites off a piece of bread with relish and dips it into the soup. The boy thinks that, having absorbed the aroma and taste, the bread has become soft and surprisingly easy to eat. The girl looks with pleasure at the happy guy who is eating his lunch with appetite, and feels relieved. The hero puts down his empty plate and says that he is full. She says she's glad he liked it. After gathering the dishes onto a tray, the girl takes it away, and, smiling, says she'll wash the plates herself. The guy denies it, and says that it's not necessary. He'll clean it himself. He thinks it's better for her to go home because she hasn't seen her homeland in a long time. The girl, holding the dirty dishes, seriously says she will stay. The guy looks at her in surprise and exclaims, asking if she really wants to spend the night here. She replies that she is going to live here and serve him. Leaning her hands on the table, the girl looks straight into his eyes. The hero is shocked and embarrassed. He asks her to wait in an anxious voice and spreads his arms to the side. The young man reminds her that this is no longer the Imperial palace and he is no longer the court alchemist. The girl nods in the affirmative. Mercia crosses her arms over her chest and confidently says that she is ready to serve him as long as he wishes. She cannot be refused. The hero looks at her in confusion. Isagi frantically searches for something to convince her, and hesitantly says that he still needs to arrange a bedroom for her, and he can't do it right now. She replies that her things are already in a free room on the second floor. The girl points to the things stacked there. The guy sighs and says that she, as always, acts with lightning speed. Yet he tries to convince her, doubting. Mercia looks at him with sad eyes and quietly asks if she can stay. The guy finally gives up and sighs wearily. He says he would be glad to have her there, and her help would be valuable. The girl, smiling and happy, asks if that's true. Isagi frowns a little and says that she should talk to her parents because they will be worried, especially Kelsey. He remembers the strict headman who shouted, not allowing this. The girl is confused. She trembles slightly and says hesitantly that she has her mother's permission. The boy asks in surprise, then realizes what she means. Meanwhile, nearby, in the village where night has already fallen, an angry village headman shouts menacingly at his daughter to the entire village. Clenching his left fist in fury, he demands that she return home immediately, and shouts that he will not allow her to live with Isagi. The boy is embarrassed and the girl is confused. The next day, the girl quietly knocks on the door of the house that the hero recently built through alchemy. The boy looks at her anxiously, greets her, and asks if she spoke to Kelsey yesterday. The girl sadly clutches the hem of her dress with her fingers, her ears drooping, and she is silent. Mercia regretfully says that she didn't get her father's permission and will have to come every morning to help him. The hero nods in understanding. She asks his forgiveness in a sad voice. Isagi thinks that she is her father's most precious daughter, and that is natural. He remembers how the angry headman clenched his fist and demanded her return. The young man believes that the conversation will eventually yield results. He looks at the upset girl and says that he is satisfied with her simply coming. She turns away with a sad look, but suddenly comes closer to him and exclaims that she will still be able to convince her father to live and work together. Putting her hand on her chest, she asks for a little time. The guy is surprised by her determination. Isagi says she shouldn't try so hard, because he'd be hurt if she started fighting. He holds out his hands in a conciliatory gesture and shyly thinks how worried he would be if they suddenly started living together. Mercia is still trying to argue with him. The boy scratches the back of his head, throwing his hand back in embarrassment. At that moment, another girl with ears is watching them from behind the bushes and suddenly calls Mercia by name. She looks around in surprise, trying to figure out who called her, and Isagi, leaning forward, peeks out from behind her and also looks at the stranger in surprise. A young and beautiful girl with cute ears appears before them. She stretches one hand forward, presses the other to her chest and joyfully runs towards them, happy to see Mercia again. The girl's jaw drops in surprise, her eyes widen. Mercia hesitantly calls out her name and calls it Nay. She runs up and grabs her hands, saying that she heard about her return and came to meet her. Mercia smiles and replies that they really haven't seen each other in a while. Isagi watches this from a distance. Naya continues to hold Mercia's hands and asks why she suddenly turned around. The girl wants to explain, but suddenly Naya notices the boy and looks at him with a surprised look. She frowns slightly and, with her mouth open, looks at him for a long time. The guy reaches out his hand, stopping in confusion under such a gaze, and Naya suddenly exclaims that she understands everything. The girl, blushing slightly, puts a finger to her chin and says with a sly smile that Mercia brought her husband. Mercia's friend is deeply embarrassed, waves her hands and hotly denies it. Later, they explain the whole situation to Naya, and the hero's name is revealed. He is Isagi, the alchemist. The girl repeats his words about wanting to make the village wealthy through alchemy and says that it is wonderful. Naya, with her eyes closed and a smile, says that he seems like a good person. She greets him and extends her hand for a handshake. The guy looks surprised. The girl with the ears introduces herself as Naya and adds that she is Mercia's childhood friend. Her smile is wide, her face turning slightly red. Smiling, she squeezes the alchemist's hand tightly and shakes it vigorously in different directions. The boy stands confused, and Mercia looks on with displeasure. The hero, with his mouth open in amazement, thinks that she is too hospitable even to him, a human. It seems incredible to him. Naya confidently leans against Mercia and, covering her mouth with her hand, slyly asks if she invited him. The girl, burning with shame, admits that she did and asks what's so special about it. The boy looks at the confused Mercia and the annoying Naya in surprise. He thinks there aren't many secrets between them, but the sudden changes in Mercia's behavior show how close she and her friend are. He looks at the girls standing with their backs to him and thinks that he would like to have such a close friend. Mercia is embarrassed by her friend's words. Naya suddenly runs away and says she has to go. She wishes Isagi prosperity on his farm and, waving goodbye, disappears. Mercia also waves back, and the boy waves after her. Mercia, blushing, holds the hem of her dress and apologizes to him, saying that her friend is too noisy. The hero denies it and says that he is glad they talked. Later, the guy suggests that the girl start working today. She straightens her hair and is surprised that it's already now. The guy explains that he wants to check as soon as possible whether it will be possible to grow a crop here. The hero thoughtfully places his hand on his chin and reflects that yesterday he removed weeds while building a house, and now he needs to plow the land. He suddenly looks surprised and turns his head to the side. Isagi says that the stone is in the way, but he wants to use it as material. The girl silently watches his actions. Isagi touches the boulder with his palm and analyzes its composition. A magic circle appears on his hand. He changes the shape of the stone, and it gradually takes on the silhouette of a person. A large stone golem appears before them. The hero rejoices in his success, while Mercia looks at the creature he created in amazement. Isagi holds a magic stone in his hands and thinks that it should be inserted into his chest as a driving force. He puts the stone back in place. The boy clenches his fist in joy and says that the golem is ready. His eyes light up with a bright light. Isagi orders him to move forward, and he obediently takes a step. Mercia looks on in amazement. The hero orders the stone golem to plow the land, and, so that it can hear, puts his hands over his mouth, raising his voice. The golem obeys again and begins to plow the field with 2 hoes. Isagi covers her eyes with her hand from the sun to see the creation better, and is glad that there are no problems with the behavior and flow of magic. The girl, smiling, says that this is exactly what one would expect from the golem he created. She adds that she is going to spray herbicide over a large area. Suddenly, the elder's voice comes from the bushes, loudly calling the boy by name and asking what it is. Mercia frowns at her father. She doesn't even turn around because she's still angry, and the hero looks in surprise at the village headman, who is staring at the golem in shock, and suddenly addresses him by name. Isagi explains that it is a golem created by Alchemy to work in the fields. He adds that it does not attack humans, so there is nothing to be afraid of. The man crosses his arms, stammering a little, and says uncertainly that alchemy is indeed useful. The elder touches his chin thoughtfully, and asks the boy if this land can really produce crops. The young man looks at him in surprise, while behind them the golem continues to plow the land. The hero smiles and says that the soil is not much different from the land in the Empire, so he is sure that everything will grow without problems. Isagi holds the seeds in his hands and adds that this is just a guess. The man frowns slightly and looks away, admitting that if it were true, it would be wonderful. Behind him, his daughter sprays herbicide on the bushes. The boy thinks about Mercia and understands with confusion. Since she doesn't react at all to her father, she is still angry. The girl silently continues her work, avoiding any attention to him. The hero takes a bag out of his bag and, feeling the tension in the air, hesitantly says that he will now show the cultivation, and invites the headman to join and watch. He smiles and explains that if everything goes according to plan, the harvest can be harvested right now. He holds a large bag in his hands, and the village headman looks on in confusion. The man repeats his words about harvesting immediately, and shakes his head in surprise. The guy spills the contents of the bag and explains that a special fertilizer created by alchemy must first be applied. The hero explains that the basis was the usual fertilizer used in the Empire, but instead of changing or enhancing it, he made it richer in nutrients. The headman looks on in surprise. The girl sees that her father doesn't understand anything and remains silent. But in the end, she intervenes and explains briefly to Kelsey. It's an alchemical fertilizer that strengthens depleted soil. He looks at her in surprise. The man says confusedly that he understands now. The hero breathes a sigh of relief as he watches them. The girl apologizes to Isagi for making him worry. The boy looks at her warmly. He smiles and says that although they often disagree, family is always irreplaceable. Mercia looks at her father and agrees with his words. The headman smiles too. The boy translates the conversation and calls on everyone to spread the fertilizer. A golem stands nearby, having already finished its work. The girl next to her father agrees. They begin to work. The girl pours fertilizer out of a bag, and the golem works with a hoe next to her. The hero explains that he will stir the fertilizer and shape the beds with a shovel. The boy adds that after that they can plant the seeds in the already prepared soil. The village headman calls him by name and asks if they need to wait for the fertilizer to mix. The hero replies that it usually does, but his alchemical fertilizer speeds up decomposition, so there's no need to wait. The man is very surprised. The girl, with her eyes closed and her voice calm, says that it's a small thing for Mr. Isagi. Her father smiles uncertainly, and Isagi rummages through his backpack, thinking that the bar for expectations has risen. The boy takes out another bag and says that first they will plant the simplest plants, which grow even in wastelands and are familiar to everyone. When he opens the bag, there are carefully selected potatoes. The hero bends over the beds and carefully places the potatoes in the holes. He explains that they need to be placed in the ground and covered with a hoe. Then the boy takes a bucket of water and confidently says that all you have to do is water it, and everything will sprout quickly. With a sharp movement, he pours the water into the holes, and the girl repeats after him. The headman stubbornly stands his ground and hesitantly denies, saying that nothing will grow that quickly. The hero looks at him in surprise. He replies that potatoes grow quickly, but usually it takes 3 or 4 months. But suddenly sprouts begin to appear in the holes, and the elder looks down at his feet in surprise. In a moment, ripe potatoes are visible across the entire field. The man opens his eyes and mouth wide, not believing what he is seeing. The girl stands nearby and smiles happily. The potatoes are fully ripe and ready to be picked. The hero, holding the empty bucket, looks at the result with pleasure and rejoices. The man behind him is so shocked that he cannot come to his senses. The guy says that the yellow leaves and stems mean it's time to harvest. Kelsey is still looking at him in amazement, shocked by his words. The hero grabs one bush and pulls it with effort. He frowns slightly and watches as Mercia and her father wait hopefully for the result. Finally, the boy, exerting his strength, pulls the bush out of the ground along with the large tubers. Isagi smiles happily at his success. He exclaims with joy that the experiment was a success. Holding the vegetable in one hand and placing the other on his side, the boy says that although he was sure, he now feels relieved. Mercia sincerely congratulates him. The headman holds another uprooted bush in his hands and exclaims loudly that he cannot believe that potatoes can be harvested on the same day. The boy looks at him. He says that surprise is natural and suggests tasting the harvest. The girl suggests making a simple stir-fry, and Isagi adds that since the weather is nice, they can just do it outside. Later they set the table. The girl peels potatoes with a knife and cuts them, while the headman and the boy sit nearby. The hero takes something out of his backpack again. The village headman looks at a strange device with a magic circle on top and asks Isagi what it is. The guy replies that it is a magical device for producing fire. Kelsey repeats his words in amazement. The boy puts his hand on the round switch on the side and turns it. Suddenly a small light flashes on the circle. He explains that all you have to do is press the button and the flame will light up. The man's mouth drops open in amazement as he watches the fire appear out of nowhere. The guy calmly adds that the lever allows you to adjust the strength of the flame however you like. The headman, with a gloomy and surprised face, says that he has heard of convenient things in the city, but a device that always easily lights a fire seems incredible. He spreads his hands wide, looking at the device on the table. The hero calmly watches his reaction. The headman, addressing Isagi by name, asks if he did it himself. The flame, meanwhile, burns steadily. The boy, with a slight smile and closed eyes, happily explains that this too is the work of an alchemist capable of creating such vessels. The man still looks at him in amazement. The girl takes a frying pan and starts frying potatoes, increasing the heat. She thinks she should add oil and fry on medium heat. She decides that when the potatoes are golden brown, they should be turned over. Mercia smiles and tosses the potatoes in the air a few times, holding the handle of the frying pan. Then the girl covers the pan with a lid. The hero and the headman, standing nearby, watch the process impatiently. Kelsey already holds the utensils, and Isagi holds the empty plate. The girl closes her eyes and smiles, thinking that she needs to let the potatoes simmer for another 4 minutes on low heat. Then she lays out the portions. She holds up a tray with the finished dish and happily announces that everything is ready. There is already a fragrant potato sauté on the table. The man's mouth is watering just looking at the food. He even wipes away a tear, thinking that his daughter made this dish. She adds that she only used oil, salt, and pepper, so everyone can season it themselves. The headman takes a fork, picks up a piece and puts it in his mouth, chewing it carefully. His eyes widen in surprise. The girl tastes it too and blushes slightly. The hero smiles and says it's very tasty. The man chews slowly, and the girl sitting opposite agrees that the taste is impeccable. The headman looks at the dish in surprise and says that the potatoes taste much better than the ones that grow in their village. He adds that he feels a strange surge of energy, and even clenches his fist with fervor. The boy, in amazement, thinks that the sensitivity of beastmen is indeed heightened. The hero calmly explains that this potato is improved, and when consumed, it has the effect of increasing vitality. The man is surprised that this is even possible. Isagi adds that despite everything, the effect is small. But the man continues to greedily eat the dish until the plate is empty. Mercia takes the dishes away, and the man and the boy remain outside. Kelsey thoughtfully places his hand on his chin and asks if the plants he has improved can be grown in this village. The guy confidently replies that, of course they can. The hero, with inspiration and a confident voice, places his hand on his chest and says that he will make sure that everything grows here, even if the conditions are unfavorable, because it is his job. The man looks on in amazement, but remains silent. Isagi explains that for stability, it is necessary to expand fields and grow other improved crops to have a diverse harvest. Kelsey smiles peacefully and thinks that he can really make these lands fertile because he has the power. The man loudly exclaims that he trusts him with this matter and puts his hand on his side. The guy sincerely thanks him and says that he will do everything gradually then. The next day he manages to sow other fields and plant tomatoes and carrots. There are now many crops growing around his house. The number of fields has increased significantly. A boy and a girl stand near the golem. Isagi admits sheepishly that he must have overdone it, and asks Mercia. She smiles and says yes. The hero shields his eyes from the scorching sun with his hand and looks into the distance. He remembers how he once grew plants in the vast areas of the palace. So now that he has so much space, he gets carried away and clearly overdoes it. Isagi, sighing wearily, pulls up another potato bush. His breathing becomes erratic, and Mercia and the golem help him. The boy wipes the sweat from his forehead and exhales heavily. He thinks about what to do with all this harvest, because the only thing left to do is store it in a magic bag. A girl with a confused expression approaches him, holding a large bag of harvest. Isagi says that there are not enough hands and they won't even have time to harvest half of it by the end of the season. Mercia asks if it is possible to create another golem. The guy smiles awkwardly and shyly replies that he cannot do it anymore because, unfortunately, he no longer has any magic stones. Suddenly, the girl puts her hand on her chest and enthusiastically suggests asking her father and mother for help. Mercia is absolutely sure that they will definitely support them. In this case, the hero asks to wait a bit. The girl agrees and says that in the meantime they will work with the golem. The guy puts one hand on his side and stretches with the other and complains about his lower back with a tired face. Suddenly he hears a female voice asking in surprise what it is. The guy turns around and sees her in front of him. He looks at the shocked girl and greets her good morning. She opens her eyes wide, covers her mouth with both hands, and says that there has never been such a huge field in their village. The hero takes off his hat and explains that yesterday they cultivated the land using alchemy. The girl exclaims in surprise and says that it has only been 2 days since he arrived. She adds incredulously that it is strange that anything should grow on this land at all, and even stranger that it is already time for the harvest. The guy smiles and says it's all thanks to alchemy. The girl gets angry, closes her eyes, and shouts through her teeth that he has one answer for everything. But suddenly a voice is heard from the side. Someone addresses Naya by name and says that Isagi is telling the truth. The boy looks at the newcomers in amazement, and Naya turns around and sees Uncle Kelsey. The man, leaning on a hoe, confidently declares that he saw everything with his own eyes yesterday. The crops perfected by Isagi grow even here. Next to him stands his smiling wife with a basket in her hands and his daughter. An enthusiastic light lights up in Naya's eyes. Her cheeks turn slightly red. She clenches her fists and says with a sincere smile that if her uncle confirms it, it's true. It seems incredible to her. She turns to the hero and enthusiastically suggests that they are now harvesting. The guy is a little embarrassed by her overly violent reaction, but confirms her words and smiles modestly, saying that he really went a little overboard with the seeding. The headman is surprised that the field has grown so much in just 1 day. Isagi scratches the back of his head, throwing his hand back in embarrassment, and apologizes sincerely, explaining that he simply overdid it with joy. Kelsey says it's wonderful, because their village, which has always suffered from food shortages, is seeing such a harvest for the first time. The village headman smiles and advises not to worry. His wife also smiles and says that this is the first time their village has had such a rich harvest, and even admits that she is excited. Naya, standing nearby, cheerfully adds that she will help with the harvesting. The boy looks at his new friends with joy. They call him to work. Mercia and her mother pick pumpkins and squash. Kelsey chops cabbage with a knife, and the golem and the tired hero pull up beets. Soon there are many baskets of various vegetables and fruits nearby, including eggplants. Isagi wipes his forehead and sighs heavily. But suddenly Naya appears from the nearby bushes and calls his name. She holds a tomato in her left hand and points at it with her right finger, smiling and asking if he can try it. The hero responds with the same smile and says that, of course you can. The girl is delighted by his agreement and exclaims enthusiastically. The girl with the ears raises the tomato to her mouth and bites off a piece with immense pleasure. Her cheeks turn red, and her hand touches her face, her eyes narrowing with pleasure. She enthusiastically asks the hero what kind of tomato it is and exclaims that it tastes incredible. The guy is delighted with this reaction. Naya says that it is completely different from the tomatoes she knew. Isagi explains that these fruits not only have accelerated growth, but also an increased sugar content. The girl exclaims with surprise and admiration that this is really cool. Mercia peeks out from behind the bushes with a displeased look. She mumbles sullenly, which seems like they're having too much fun together. Naya, holding a tomato in her hand, looks at her. The guy with the bitten fruit also looks at Mercia, surprised by her expression. Mercia takes another tomato, and with an unwavering face says that she will try it too. The hero readily agrees. The girl confidently bites off a piece. But suddenly Naya comes close to her and covers her mouth with her hand, expressing surprise at how cute she has suddenly become. Mercia frowns slightly and looks at her friend in surprise. Naya looks at her with a sly smile, and Mercia's face flares red, almost like smoke. She frowns in annoyance and angrily calls out her name. The girl yells at her to wait and runs after Naya, who runs away, shouting indignantly that she is angry. Isagi, who is watching from the side, takes the tomato and thinks with a slight smile that they really get along well. 3 days have passed. In the field near the hero's house stand Naya, Mercia, the headman with his wife, and Isagi himself. The guy says that the harvest is complete, and sincerely thanks him for the help. Kelsey asks what he's going to do with all the harvest. The guy, holding the bag in his hands, smiles and says that he'll give it to the villagers, because if you keep it in the magic bag, it will quickly fill up. Mercia's mother raises her index finger and suggests a feast. The hero looks at her in surprise and asks if she really means a feast. She says with a big smile that it would be great to treat everyone to dishes made from the harvest from their field. That way everyone would get to know it and living together would be much easier. Isagi hesitates a bit, thinking that the banquet is a hassle to prepare. He touches his chin and remembers the palace celebrations. At that moment, Mercia calls him by name. She explains that despite the name, a banquet is a simple gathering. Just bring tables and chairs to the central square and invite people. The guy says he understands. The village headman loudly exclaims that he will summon the people and begin preparations. He announces a banquet for tonight. The hero at first happily agrees, but then realizes with surprise that everything will happen today. Later, the boy asks the girl if everything is ready, and says that it is time for them to hurry to the square too. He is worried if everything will go well. Mercia does not understand his anxiety. Isagi admits that he is human and has only recently arrived here. He is anxious and hesitantly asks if anyone will actually come to his feast. The girl says that even though the celebration was scheduled for today, she is still sure that people will come. The hero looks at the square with amazement. Mercia tells him that everyone will come, because it's been a long time since there have been such celebrations. Isagi is surprised by the crowd of people behind her. Even the children are happily running through the streets. The boy is amazed by so many residents, but looks at it all with a smile. Mercia is happy too. Suddenly, Mercia's mother's voice is heard. She addresses Isagi by name and says that it's time to start cooking, so she asks him to help with the ingredients. The guy agrees. He pours out a mountain of vegetables from his magic bag: eggplants, tomatoes, onions, pumpkins, and carrots. The woman is amazed at the amount of produce. The headman's wife says she hasn't seen so many fresh ingredients in their village in a long time. She hesitates about what to cook, while the hero happily watches the cheerful crowd. All the Beastman residents were busy preparing for the holiday. Each did their own thing. Among them, Mercia, Naya, and the others were preparing the ingredients for the dishes. Once all the ingredients were prepared and placed in the cauldron, Isagi began to apply alchemy to the dish. The villagers of Plumina chatted excitedly as they watched the fire light up and the food in the cauldron begin to boil. While the dish was being prepared, the beast-human girls watched the cauldron and gradually added new ingredients. Isagi smiled, carefully observing the process. He was interested in watching how it was being prepared. Eventually, all the dishes were ready. As the villagers approached the tables, Kelsey, Mercia's father, called Isagi to the main stage. The man asked the boy to come out to him for a minute. Isagi agreed to his request. Then the headman addressed the villagers and thanked them for their presence. He announced that it was thanks to Isagi that their village, which had always suffered from a lack of food, had received such a good harvest. Isagi blushed with embarrassment upon hearing the speech. He hadn't expected to be introduced so suddenly in front of the entire village. The guy stood on stage, hesitant after the unexpected introduction. However, in a moment he gathered himself and decided to give a welcoming speech. After regaining some control of himself, Isagi introduced himself in a trembling voice and confessed that he was an alchemist. He added that he had only arrived in the village a few days ago and still knew little. The villagers smiled warmly as they listened to his shy speech. Then the boy pointed out that there were enough ingredients, so everyone could eat as much as they wanted. Naya and Mercia watched him with satisfied smiles. After the speech, the headman asked everyone to welcome a new resident named Isagi and raise their glasses to him. He himself raised a wooden mug. All the villagers raised their glasses with smiles and loudly welcomed the boy as a new resident of the village. Then they happily drank to the bottom, celebrating. The village of Plumina was alive with festive noise. Most of the residents were sitting at long tables with their families, happy with so much delicious food that they hadn't had in a long time. The boy, walking down the street, awkwardly noticed that all the seats were already taken. The villagers were greedily feasting on their food, and the entire space was filled with lively commotion. But suddenly he was called from a distance. It was Mercia, who was already sitting at the table. She pointed to an empty seat next to her and Naya. When he approached, the girl said that she had already put a portion for him. Isagi thanked her for her concern. Already on his plate was a dish called pot-au-feu with vegetables, a thick, rich soup made with beef and vegetables. Isagi was delighted just by its appetizing appearance. He scooped up a spoonful of the pot-au-feu and gazed at the dish with admiration. Isagi admired the food. Mercia was embarrassedly pleased by his gaze, and Naya was also delighted by his admiration. The boy tasted the soup and enjoyed its taste. After tasting the dish, he looked down at his empty spoon with satisfaction. The vegetable pot au feu was surprisingly delicious. The sweetness of the carrots and onions perfectly combined with the spiciness of the black pepper. It was incredible. Isagi also tasted potatoes, mushrooms, sausages, and other ingredients. Mercia watched him eat, smiling. At this time, Naya also tasted the dish. She was delighted and exclaimed that she had not tasted such a rich vegetable soup in a long time. Naya ate with pleasure, not hiding her joy. It turned out that due to constant economy, they often cooked even with vegetable skins. Naya agreed with Mercia, but now she was sincerely happy with so much food. One of the villagers overheard their conversation. He said with a sad look that this feast would one day end, and they would return to their meager diet. His words stunned everyone. People didn't want to hear such thoughts in the midst of the holiday, but the peasant believed his own fears. Isagi watched all this in awkward amazement. He realized that he couldn't judge the man for being anxious, because those feelings were natural. But at the same time, the other residents looked at him reproachfully. At that time, the level of food security in each household had indeed not improved. This truth saddened Isagi, and his smile faded. Then the boy made a decision. He stood up, called out to everyone, and tried to calm the agitated villagers. He announced to the people of Plumina that even they would be able to grow the selected crops he had created. Everyone fell silent and began to listen attentively. The boy explained that these plants grow even in depleted soil, as they are resistant to cold and disease. The villagers listened to his speech in amazement. Then the silver-haired boy solemnly promised to distribute the seeds to everyone. His gaze was full of determination. Naya looked at him in amazement. She was amazed that even she could grow such plants. Isagi confirmed her words and said that if Naya cared for the seeds, she would also receive useful fruits. The girl was delighted with this news. People began to whisper among themselves after his words. The peasant who was listening to him was shocked. He exclaimed in bewildered delight that he felt as if he were in a dream. He was struck by the offer to help the village overcome its food shortage, but this man did not hide his concern. After all, Isagi had only recently arrived in their village. He did not understand why the stranger was doing so much for them and asked him directly. Mercia was worried by these harsh words. The man didn't understand why Isagi was trying so hard, but the boy remained calm and showed no resentment. Only his clenched fist betrayed his anger. Then he began to explain. He told how he had been abandoned as a baby near a church in the capital. He was an orphan. The peasant listened in astonishment. Isagi continued, telling how he struggled for crumbs of food, living in constant hunger and suffering. The people of the village were shocked by his sad story. Finally, he said that was why he knew what it was like to live without food. He understood what it was like to starve and not have delicious food every day. That's why he asked, smiling, "Doesn't everyone want to eat delicious food to their heart's content?" Despite the sad memories of his childhood, he did not speak with regret. The man was stunned not only by the sad story, but also by the fact that despite everything, the boy was smiling broadly at the world. He looked at him with wide eyes. He awkwardly apologized to Isagi for his doubts. But the boy wasn't angry, because if he were in his place, he would have hesitated too. Mercia looked at him with a smile. Then the farmer asked with determination if Isagi could share the seeds with him. If there was so much food on his table, he too wanted to try growing a crop. Someone raised their hand, and then others began to pull their hands up. The villagers approached Isagi, all wanting to get the seeds and try farming too. The boy was stunned by the crowd rushing for the seeds. In a slight panic, he reassured the villagers, saying that there was plenty of seeds, and that there would be enough for everyone. Mercia watched with a warm smile. Because whoever a person is, and however strong they may seem, poor nutrition hardens the heart and makes one forget the meaning of life. That is why, having become an alchemist, Isagi continued his research into food. The guy distributed the seeds he had developed. The villagers lined up in a long line for the bags. He understood that everyone was equal in the face of hunger. And that was why he did everything he could to help people fight it. In that case, Isagi decided to develop agriculture even further. The boy looked with a confident look at the happy villagers who had received bags of seeds. Among them, he noticed a familiar man, who was already holding a huge sack of grain in his hands. Isagi understood that the sooner the peasants started cultivating the land, the sooner the food situation in Plumina would improve. Kelsey was also busy distributing seeds among the people. And then the man with the sack in his hands again loudly called out to all the villagers, attracting their attention. He was well aware that all this was being done for the prosperity of their village, and therefore he inspired his fellow villagers, giving them hope for a bright future. The people raised their glasses. Night had fallen, and only the bright lanterns illuminated the streets. The inhabitants of Plumina were happy, because now they could improve their lives, and that evening they drank to the bottom with a joyful hubbub. Meanwhile, in the Ramirez Empire, in the Imperial castle itself, the chief alchemist was reading a report on the growth of magical tool production to an older man. The man addressed him by his name, Garius. It turned out that the heir to the throne, first Prince Weiss Drevenshire Remoris, was standing before him. He wondered why there had been no report on Isagi this month. In fact, the crown prince was eager to know what he was doing. The chief alchemist, Garius, was confused to hear that his master remembered that brazen commoner. For a moment he couldn't find a response, and an awkward silence fell over the room. He later told Prince Weiss that he had simply dismissed Isagi, deeming him unnecessary. There was silence again for a few seconds. The crown prince was stunned by the news and demanded an explanation. Arguing, the alchemist arrogantly stated that the task of alchemists was to create weapons and magical items for the army, while Isagi did nothing of the sort, limiting himself to the bare minimum. Hearing these words, Prince Weiss Remoris became furious and called the man a fool. His palms slammed on the table so that the sound echoed throughout the office. He saw this as a grave mistake. Garius was shocked by such fury, because to him Isagi was just an arrogant commoner, not worth paying attention to. But the prince angrily pointed out that they were pinning their hopes on the very cultures that Isagi had created to solve the empire's famine. He entrusted him with this and even increased the research budget. However, despite the prince's anger, Garius, in a trembling voice, once again called Isagi worthless. He found it hard to believe that the work of a rootless boy could be more valuable than the creation of a magical weapon. But Prince Weiss's angry voice left no room for doubt. He menacingly asked what else, besides status, did Garius see in his subordinates. To him, the chief alchemist was talentless. The gray-haired man began to tremble all over, realizing the seriousness of the situation. Prince Weiss looked at him with a cold, angry gaze. Cold sweat was running down Garius's pale face. He didn't know what to do now, as the heir to the throne was enraged by his actions. Prince Weiss, with a stern face, ordered that an alternative food supply be provided immediately. The empire was in dire need of more food. Garius waited in a cold sweat for the lord's next words, trembling with fear of his wrath. After a short pause, scaring him even more, Prince Weiss added, "There is another option. Garius must return Isagi, because the boy was now engaged in farming." Meanwhile, outside the castle at dawn, a gray-haired old woman with a hoe in her hands thanked Isagi. She had not believed that a crop could grow on such land, and was sincerely glad of it. Mercia and Isagi smiled happily as they listened to the praise. They simultaneously replied that the most important thing to them was her happiness. Then they said goodbye to their grandmother. And all this was made possible because they distributed seeds of selected crops to the residents of Plumina. Thus began a real agricultural boom in the village. All the inhabitants were busy growing plants and fruits obtained from the boys' seeds. Everyone had their own duties in the field. One of the beast girls remarked that if everything went smoothly, Plumina would have a great harvest. Isagi agreed, but something still bothered him. The boy was lost in deep thought. Seeing his concern, Mercia immediately became concerned and wanted to know what was troubling him. Then he explained. He created the current fertilizer by improving the Imperial one, but at this rate it will only last for a few years. The girl listened to his words with amazement. Isagi continued, saying that this was why they needed a new fertilizer that could be produced directly in the village. Mercia continued to stare at him in surprise. He thought about it, adding that it was possible to buy Imperial fertilizer from traveling merchants, but it was much more profitable to create it from local raw materials, so as not to spend a lot of money on purchasing it. The girl understood that if she constantly took fertilizer from Isagi's bag, the problem wouldn't go away forever. After listening to her words, Isagi decided to first collect all the types of fertilizers that were already used in Plumina, and resolutely informed Mercia about it. She listened carefully to the boy's final decision and promised to ask the peasant families if they knew about fertilizers and ask them to share them. Later, they were sitting at home. On the table were only 3 types of fertilizers collected in the village. Isagi said that this was not enough, and explained that because of the depleted soil, few people in the village were engaged in farming. However, even this is enough to create the basis for a new fertilizer. For an improved composition, raw materials with a higher content of the magical power characteristic of this land are required. Hearing this, Mercia said with a smile that the necessary materials could be found in the forest. This surprised Isagi. She explained to him that it was there that rare natural materials grew that were not found anywhere else. The girl pointed to the window, which looked out onto the forest, and the boy realized that he could really find what he needed there. Isagi decided to go there with a confident smile. He was about to go alone, but his words were interrupted by the girl's unexpected statement. Mercia said she would go with him. The boy was stunned by her desire. She added that she had been to this forest many times before and would be its guide, so the collection of materials would go much faster. But Isagi was still worried about the dangers that might lie there. The girl reassured him that everything would be fine, and gripped the broom handle tightly. She calmly explained that even though she was a servant, she was still obligated to protect her master, so she was ready to fight if necessary. Isagi looked at her in surprise, not understanding how the status of a maid could be related to combat skills. It turned out that maids were supposed to have strength to protect their master. He hesitated for a moment when he heard about the maid's combat duties, but in the end he only awkwardly agreed that Mercia knew how to fight. Soon they were walking through the forest. Isagi was amazed by its beauty, but for the girl this area had long been familiar. They walked further along the path, the boy curiously examining the flora and fauna, while Mercia walked ahead, leading him like an experienced guide. Isagi noted that the nature here was different from that in the Empire, and asked the dark-haired girl about it. Mercia calmly replied that in the wild, there is a struggle for survival, which is why everything develops faster here. Plants and animals evolve rapidly. As she was explaining to him the difference between the animal kingdom and the Empire, Isagi noticed a bush nearby and became interested in it. Star-shaped fruits grew on it. The boy reached out his hand in delight, wanting to touch them, but Mercia abruptly stopped him, warning him that if he touched the fruit, it would immediately spit out acid. Isagi jerked his hand away in fright. He realized with confusion that he should have examined the plant first, not reached for it. The girl added that dangerous plants were often found in the forest. Alchemists had the ability to analyze any substance. Isagi frowned, opened his eyes, and used the research skill on the fruit bush. It turned out to be a carambola, which grows in the southern forests of the animal kingdom. Its fruit squirts acid when squeezed, and if it gets on the skin, it must be washed off immediately with water and treatment should be started. The guy decided to collect these fruits because they could be an excellent material for creating acid solutions and weed killers. Mercia decided to help him by using a thick cloth to prevent the fruits from spraying acid during harvesting. She held the fruit wrapped in a cloth, and Isagi carefully cut it with small scissors. Then the boy carefully pierced the fruits with a needle and collected the acid in test tubes, hiding them in his magic backpack. Mercia helped him with this. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, he said loudly that for him, such meetings are in practice an interesting and even fun activity. Hearing this, Mercia asked how it was in the Empire. She guessed from his words that such activities were rare there. The boy agreed with her suggestion. Indeed, he had always been told that gathering materials was better left to knights or adventurers. Although he knew how to deal with it himself, he wanted to continue the conversation, but suddenly fell silent. The girl screamed sharply, calling for her master. Isagi turned pale, froze in horror, and looked away with a frightened look. A terrifying creature, resembling a wild boar but much larger than usual, appeared before them. The boy and girl tried to quietly retreat. They stared intently at the huge boar that had suddenly appeared in front of them. Isagi whispered and asked the girl about the creature. Mercia explained that it was a boar demon, an extremely ferocious monster that instantly charges with its enormous fangs. Suddenly, the demonic beast lunged at them, its mouth open, spittle spurting from its mouth, its fangs flashing, preparing to strike a deadly blow. Isagi was frozen in fear. The boy was in despair, not knowing how to avoid the inevitable attack and not get injured. But suddenly, the girl called out to him in a calm voice, snapping him out of his stupor. Isagi looked at her. She confidently said that she would handle it herself and ordered him to move away. The girl stood in front of him, covering him with her, which frightened the boy even more. Meanwhile, a huge boar was rushing at them, preparing to crush them. Mercia stood still, ready to meet the attack, while Isagi stared at her with tension. But as the monster charged forward, the black-haired girl suddenly disappeared from his sight. The fangs only cut through the air. The boar demon was turning its head in surprise, trying to find its prey, while Isagi, holding his breath, looked at it from the side. Suddenly the monster looked up and froze. A shadow appeared above him. It was a girl. She jumped high and flipped over in the air. The boar lunged forward, trying to avoid the blow. But Mercia rolled over several times and quickly approached the monster, gathering her fist to strike. She knew she had to finish off the animal quickly, because the most important thing to her was Isagi's safety. The girl punched the boar straight in the face. The boar didn't have time to dodge and took the blow completely. The force of the impact sent the monster flying several meters and crashing into a tree. Isagi barely managed to jump away to avoid being hit by it. Calm and determined, the girl watched as the monster was thrown aside. Now their lives were no longer in danger. Isagi was stunned that Mercia had been able to defeat such a huge demon with a single blow. He stared at the fallen boar in astonishment. She calmly said that she could not allow her master to waste his strength on such nonsense. And, brushing the dust off her clothes, she stood as if nothing had happened. Isagi knew that the physical strength of beastmen exceeded that of humans, but Mercia's strength was far beyond the norm. He doubted whether she was truly a simple servant and asked about it. Hearing his question, Mercia was silent at first, choosing her words, and then replied that she was indeed a servant. She explained that as a representative of the beast race, she was only able to serve in the Imperial palace due to her fighting power. She often performed night missions because she could see well in the dark, and her maid-like appearance deceived her enemies. She was often attacked by bandits. Isagi looked at her with a warm smile, understanding that in an empire where beastmen were humiliated, more was always demanded of them. The girl remembered how she had been constantly being called to do dark things lately, so she was relieved to go with Isagi. The boy was stunned by this confession, but he replied that it was thanks to her and the rest of the guards that people like him could live safely in the palace. Hearing his words, the girl looked at the guy in surprise. She was struck by his sincerity. Isagi continued, thanking his companion for all she had done for him. He looked at Mercia with a warm, grateful smile. The girl was speechless, stunned by his words, and for a moment could not think of any answer. Finally, blushing, she whispered awkwardly that the night watch was also a maid's duty, so it was a small matter. In this way, she tried to minimize her role. She looked away in confusion, but her black ponytail, sweeping from side to side, showed her true mood. Isagi thought that the duties she was taking on were more befitting of knights. The boy continued the conversation, remembering that a demon's body must have a magic stone. This was the first time Mercia had heard of such a thing and knew nothing about it. Isagi explained that the stone stores the power the monster gets from the air and prey. Alchemists use these stones to create things. He walked over to the boar carcass. The guy began to search for the flow of magical energy in the demon's body to determine the exact location of the stone. A moment later, he felt it with his palm. The source of magic was in the area of the monster's neck. Isagi took a dagger from his bag and aimed it at the place where he felt the power. After cutting open the skin, he and the girl saw a strange object. Isagi held his breath at what he saw. Inside lay a huge magic stone. The quality of its energy was surprisingly high. They obtained quite a lot of loot. But Mercia remarked that although the beast was gigantic, it was only an average monster in these woods. Her words stunned the boy. After all, in the Imperial capital, even small monsters were rare, and here a giant was considered only ordinary. Isagi asked about the number of monsters near the village of Plumina. Mercia thought for a moment and replied, if their numbers were not reduced from time to time, then entire packs could attack the village. This shocked Isagi. He realized that he had a great opportunity to collect a lot of quality stones. Enthusiastically, the guy decided to use them as a basis for creating a new fertilizer. It would be faster than working with other raw materials. Mercia supported the idea, suggesting that they collect more stones from the monsters. Isagi readily agreed, and they set off in search of their next prey. But before he could leave, the girl stopped him. She had something important to say. Isagi looked at her expectantly. It turned out that Mercia wanted to take the meat of the demon boar with her, because it was very tasty. She was already leaning over its carcass. The guy apologized because he was too busy thinking about the fertilizer and forgot about it. He gave her time to get what she needed. Mercia began to disassemble the carcass, while Isagi took a wooden barrel from his bag. He realized once again how different this place was from a castle. Here, one had to forage for food on their own. The girl concentrated and skillfully cut up the demon's carcass. Knives and buckets for liquid lay beside her, and she was putting the pieces of meat into a barrel. The boy remembered that before he had only collected materials and done what was required of him. He looked at Mercia, then turned to her. Isagi asked to be taught how to cut up carcasses. The girl, hearing this, stood by the hanging boar, ready to explain. She froze for a moment in surprise, not expecting such a request, and looked at the boy in surprise. But the next moment she smiled warmly and agreed to teach him this craft. Eventually, their bag was filled to the brim with magic stones. The job was done. So Mercia suggested returning to the village. Isagi also understood that the stones they had obtained were enough to create new fertilizer. The boy had already taken a step towards the village, but suddenly he felt something strange under his foot, which made him stop and not go any further. He knelt down and examined his palm, which bore a dark mark from the soil he had just touched. Isagi immediately realized that the quality of the land here was changing. They had gone too deep into the forest, and this place was completely different, so the boy decided not to return. He confessed to Mercia that he wanted to explore the area further. Meanwhile, The girl wiped her daggers after dismembering the demon. The boy pointed to a distant mountain and asked if there were any ore deposits there. The girl looked in that direction. She confirmed that ore was once mined there, but warned that the journey could be long and tiring. Isagi confidently explained that with the help of alchemy, he would be able to determine the location of the deposit more quickly, so their journey would not be delayed. His words dispelled her doubts. He looked at the distant mountain with determination. Because the ore veins meant the possibility of creating new golems and buildings, this fascinated him. Excitedly, he exclaimed that it was time to leave. The ore deposits were waiting for them. After a while, they reached the foot of the mountain. The path led along a narrow path along the cliff, and the girl asked anxiously if the boy was all right. Isagi replied with feigned calm that he was fine, although inside he was shackled by fear of the dangerous passage. His body was trembling. Cold sweat was running down his face. One careless step and he could fall into the abyss. Instead, Mercia walked confidently, easily, as if this path was familiar to her. Isagi even felt a slight envy of her agility. Suddenly the girl jumped down, bypassing the long path and descending straight, like a wild cat. The boy didn't have that kind of courage, so he cautiously made his way through each dangerous section until he finally, exhausted, reached her. There she told him that there was an underground passage nearby. Exhausted and sweaty from the exertion, he could barely catch his breath, but finally they reached the right place. They entered a dark underground tunnel. Isagi immediately noticed that it was very old. Mercia explained that it had been dug a long time ago, which is why the wear and tear was noticeable. Looking at the fortifications, the boy realized the walls were held together by scorched earth and old wooden supports. It was a miracle that they hadn't collapsed yet. He asked permission to fortify the dangerous areas. The girl agreed without hesitation. Isagi raised his hand, and the light of the alchemical circle unfolded at the entrance. Streams of magic passed through the stones, strengthening the entire structure. The job was done. The tunnel was now secure. Mercia led him further in. She walked ahead, while he carefully examined the structures near the entrance, analyzing the fortifications. It was dark inside, and the boy felt a slight sadness. Without light, he would not be able to properly explore the mine. He remembered that Beastman had excellent vision in the dark. The girl apologized in confusion for forgetting to prepare a lamp for him. So Isagi himself took the magic lamp out of his bag. Turning the switch, he lit it. A special stone glowed inside. Warm light flooded the dungeon, dispelling the darkness. He moved confidently forward, and Mercia looked at the device in surprise. She decided to carry the lamp herself so he could focus on finding the ore. The guy thanked her for her help. They moved deeper and deeper. The girl lit the way, while Isagi carefully studied the walls of the tunnel, looking for traces of deposits. After a while, his alchemical sense indicated the location. He confidently extended his hand, indicating the direction. Approaching the stone wall, the boy placed his hand and felt a powerful current inside. His heart beat faster. He had found ore. It was in this section of the stone wall of the underground passage that a huge vein of ore was hidden. The boy excitedly reported this, and Mercia shone a lamp at him. But suddenly she left the lamp and pulled out a pickaxe from somewhere, intending to start digging right away. Isagi stopped her, saying that there was no need for that. He explained that alchemy allows not only to strengthen materials, but also to make them brittle by directing a flow of magical power into them. The boy placed his palms against the wall, and an alchemical circle lit up there. If you hit a weak point, the wall can be easily destroyed. He used alchemy, and the glow of the circle spread across the stone, breaking the barrier that blocked the way to the ore. Soon, pieces of ore began to fall from the hole. Isagi asked the girl to collect everything that fell to the ground. Then he put his hand on the wall again, wanting to get even more ore veins. His instincts quickly found the right areas, and immediately several alchemical circles opened on the wall, exploding with new streams of ore. Mercia watched this in utter shock, while simultaneously putting the stones into a bag. But in a moment the flow became too powerful. So much ore was falling that she barely had time to shovel it away from her feet. The wall was breaking apart, pieces of various rocks falling to the ground with a crash. Isagi called out to Mercia, but the girl only showed that she was knee-deep in a pile of ore. Realizing his mistake, the boy hastily apologized. His excessive enthusiasm almost hurt her. Finally, she broke free, and he suggested that they sort out the loot right here. The girl agreed and helped to lay it all out. They sat down on the stone floor. Isagi examined each fragment carefully, while Mercia waited patiently, picking through the loot. A lamp beside her cast a warm light. The boy realized that they had come across many different rocks: iron, copper, lead, magical ore, and some gold and even precious stones. But as he had guessed, there was neither adamantite nor mithril among them. The girl remarked with a smile that she had expected nothing else from Isagi's skill. He looked up in surprise, not understanding what she meant. Mercia explained that such mining technology would be incredibly valuable in any mine. She sincerely acknowledged his abilities. The guy said that alchemists were indeed sent to the mines, but for the nobility, it was considered hard labor. He himself had often been forced to work there, and the memory of it darkened his face. The girl looked at him with concern. But the next moment, Isagi regained control of himself, pushed aside his memories, and got down to business. He had to process the ore. He reached out his hand to the pile, infusing it with magical power. And right before her eyes, the rough stones began to change shape, transforming into smooth, shiny ingots. Mercia even picked one up. It shone so pure that it reflected her face like a mirror. She gazed at the ingot with admiration. The boy did not stop, processing the ore faster and faster. The girl came to her senses and began to help him. The two of them worked in silence, only the light of the lamp and the clang of metal filling the space. Finally, almost all the ore had been processed. Ingots of various metals lay on the floor, ready for future work. Mercia asked in surprise if they had really gotten that much. Isagi confidently replied that with that amount, many useful things could be created. He was filled with joy at the thought that now he would be able to make new golems, strengthen the fields, and forge tools for an even greater harvest. But he felt the greatest happiness from the process of creation itself. The girl asked him in surprise what he meant. Then Isagi turned to the black-haired girl and looked at Mercia with a satisfied expression on his face. He didn't answer her question, but kept a calm smile. Later, they returned to the village. The boy and girl were standing in a vacant lot near their home, and it was there that Isagi enthusiastically announced that he wanted to build his own workshop. The girl was surprised by his words and asked in disbelief if he was really talking about the workshop. Isagi explained that explosions were possible during the alchemical processing, and the odors from the processes would be too pungent. Therefore, he decided to build the workshop separate from the dwelling. Then Mercia offered her help with the construction, but the guy refused, deciding to do it on his own. Changing the subject, he said that it was time for the second harvest, and she would help him the most if she supported her fellow villagers in the fields. The girl listened to him seriously. The boy turned away, and Mercia, holding the basket in her hands, set off for the fields to help the villagers with their work. Isagi was left alone and was already impatiently preparing for the task. There was a lot of construction work ahead, so he wanted to start immediately. First, he determined the size of the workshop by measuring the ground with steps. In his mind, he dreamed of a huge building, but realizing that it would be difficult to maintain a structure that was too large, he settled on a simpler option. Using pegs and rope, he marked out the required space. He decided that one workplace and a small warehouse were enough for him in the workshop. The guy unwound the tape and began marking. Soon the plot for the workshop was clearly marked out, and its size even exceeded the area of his house. Later, he brought building materials, prepared wood and bricks to strengthen the walls. Now it remained to make the mortar. Isagi took out a wooden box and placed it on the ground, filling it with cement and sand in a ratio of 1:3. Then, placing the alchemical circle over the mixture, he instantly mixed the components into a homogeneous mass. Then he made a well in the center and slowly poured in the water, stirring again until the lumps dissolved and the mixture became thick and firm. The solution was ready, thick and without a single lump, just as it should be. Then the boy began to lay bricks, at the same time covering them with cement using the alchemical circle. Thus, step by step, he built the walls. He methodically repeated the same action. A layer of cement, a brick on top, and so on over and over again. The workshop was gradually rising. The main work was completed. All that remained was to build the roof. The boy looked around his construction with satisfaction. Isagi was already covered in sweat from his work, but even the damp brick walls gave a feeling of comfort. He thought about his next steps, because now it was time to start decorating the interior of the workshop. Meanwhile, the girl returned from the fields. She was carrying a basket and, tired but satisfied, was heading towards the house. When she saw the building, she called out to the boy and asked how his work was progressing. And just then, the entire workshop structure opened up before her eyes. Amazed, she froze in place, not looking away. Before her stood a beautiful, tall brick house. Simple and without luxury, but with a strange feeling of warmth and comfort. There were still boards and boxes of materials lying nearby. As she stepped outside, the girl heard Isagi's voice. He was glad that the room was already starting to look like a real alchemical workshop. Mercia timidly knocked on the door, politely asking permission to come in. The boy, upon hearing her voice, immediately allowed her in. She opened the door, but first paused in the doorway. What she saw inside stunned her. A bright room with windows opened before her, where a table with alchemical instruments already stood. Open boxes lay on the floor, and Isagi was busy arranging things. The boy looked awkwardly at the frozen girl and explained that he was just doing interior decoration. Marcia silently looked at him with warmth and admiration. She complimented him on the aesthetics of the workshop. The walls were beautiful not only on the outside, but everything inside looked great too. Isagi blushed at her words and was genuinely happy about the compliment. The boy spoke enthusiastically, non-stop, telling how he built the workshop. He changed the proportions of the wood resin to reduce the brightness of the walls and remove glare. This made the light reflect softer, and the rooms were filled with warm shades. He spoke excitedly about every detail of the workshop, and the girl listened to him with a smile. He mentioned that he wanted to create a sense of antiquity, so he had lined one wall with brick. Isagi spoke with enthusiasm, and Mercia listened calmly, admiring his sincerity. With a sincere smile, she congratulated him on the completion of the building, because now he had a real workshop for experiments and research. Isagi thanked her, also smiling. He leaned closer, and the girl blushed and turned away. But he, regardless, was happy and said that now he could explore as much as he wanted. Embarrassed, Mercia, all red, quickly turned away and offered to help him arrange the furniture. The guy readily agreed. Suddenly, Isagi remembered and asked for a bed to be put in the workshop so he could rest. But Mercia immediately flatly refused. The guy was surprised and confused and wanted to know the reason for such a sharp refusal. The girl explained with a dark expression. If you put the bed, he would always sleep here, avoiding the house. She knew him better than he knew himself. Isagi fell silent in confusion, unable to find the words, because her arguments were undeniable. She stood firm and refused to give in. The boy realized that she could see right through him. Then he wanted to ask for at least a sofa, but the girl beat him to it and also refused. Frowning, she said she was doing it for his health, and indignantly emphasized that he should only sleep indoors. Isagi awkwardly agreed with her words, resigned to the fact that he was not destined to rest in the workshop. To avoid further pressure, the boy quickly changed the subject and suggested starting to make fertilizer. Mercia immediately agreed to help. To do this, they gathered materials from the forests and mines near the village. Isagi remembered the boar demon and the underground tunnel with oars. Finally, the day came when they began work. The boy placed the plant on the table, and all the other necessary materials were spread out next to it. Mercia brought a drawing board. First, they needed 3 types of fertilizers that the peasants used. There were bags of these mixtures on the table, and the boy looked at them carefully. Isagi asked Mercia to report on the results of enhancing the properties of these 3 fertilizers. The girl began to report. She reported that local fertilizers were significantly inferior to those produced in the Empire. All the data was collected in a document that she gave to the guy, so that he could read it himself. Isagi studied the papers carefully, and noticed that the fertilizer available had clear limits on its effectiveness. He looked thoughtfully at the tables with the labeled data. He decided that it would be better to combine the fertilizer with another raw material. Hearing this, Mercia pointed out that it would take a lot of time. The guy understood that creating fertilizers from scratch could take years, but now they had both the Empire's data and the necessary documents. Besides, they had enough quality magic stones. Isagi showed one of them to the girl with a smile, so he wasn't worried. The girl looked at him in surprise. After all, they had gotten these stones from monsters in the forest, and it seemed to her that their quality was questionable. The guy assured her that they were excellent. He explained that in the capital, such a stone cost 20 silver coins. Mercia was stunned by what she heard. In their village of Plumina, these stones were usually sold for just 1 silver coin. Isagi was so surprised by the price that the stones simply slipped from his hands. Stunned, the boy turned to the black-haired girl and asked incredulously if magic stones were really that common in their village of Plumina. She thoughtfully confirmed that the stones were indeed common here, and every family had at least one. Isagi was even more disheartened by this answer. His voice was muffled, and Mercia looked at him in confusion. But in a moment he pulled himself together and smiled at his own reflection in the stone. He confidently said that he would create high-quality fertilizer from this material. They got back to work. First, Isagi wanted to add a rock to the mixture, so he asked Mercia to prepare the pots for the experiments. Meanwhile, he focused on the stone, and it rose into the air, radiating power. The boy was balancing the chaotic energy within him, gradually ordering the flow of magic. A powerful stream of magical power erupted from the stone, but Isagi confidently maintained control, taming it. Eventually, the energy calmed down, and he purified the stone of impurities using alchemy. A purified magic crystal hung before him, shining with an even light. The boy smiled contentedly. At this time, Mercia brought a whole bunch of pots. Isagi thanked her for her help. Her gaze was drawn to the purified stone. which was different from ordinary ones, radiating new power. Its purple glow was so pure and beautiful that in the Empire such stones were worn as jewelry. Mercia looked at him with admiration and wondered what else these stones could be used for. However, she soon watched in horror as Isagi ruthlessly crushed and mixed this handsome stone with fertilizer. The guy noticed her disappointment and apologized because he saw how she admired his beauty. Mercia said with feigned calm that it was just material, but there was sadness in her eyes. She hurried to get new pots and the boy continued to work, still looking after her anxiously. He saw her ears droop in sorrow at the loss of such beauty. So he decided that one day he would give her a piece of jewelry made of a magical stone. In the meantime, he continued to grind the ingredients to create a new fertilizer for the land of Plumina. He added grass with a powerful reproduction factor, insect-resistant terrarium, and quick decomposing genjid to the mix, combining them with the collected materials. Soon a prototype of the new fertilizer was in front of them. Mercia, holding the pot, suggested that they try it out immediately. They signed the first pot with the number 1 and filled it with soil. Then they planted the selected arugula seeds, covered them with a layer of soil, and watered them. And at that very moment a sprout appeared, cutting through the ground. Isagi stared at it in amazement. But the growth did not stop. The stem rapidly stretched upward, turning into a mature plant. He admired the juicy bunches of arugula grown with the new fertilizer. With surprise and delight, the boy noted that the growth exceeded all expectations and reached out to write down the result. But the arugula didn't stop. It kept growing, towering over both him and the girl. They both watched in shocked admiration. The plant reached several meters. Its stems became thick and heavy, and the pot trembled, barely able to withstand such rapid growth. Mercia watched the rapid growth of the plant with amazement and anxiety. The arugula reached the ceiling, its branches already digging into the wooden beams. She excitedly warned Isagi that in a little while the walls and roof would simply collapse. The boy turned pale with fright. He rushed to the pot and abruptly reached out his hand to the base of the stem. In his haste, he knocked the pot over. Concentrating his alchemical power, he destroyed the base of the plant to immediately stop its rampant growth. He threw the destroyed plant forcefully onto the floor, removing it from the desk. He stared in fear at the fallen monster plant, realizing that out of mere curiosity he had almost destroyed the newly built workshop. Mercia noted that they had no idea how big the arugula would grow. She assumed it was the wine herb with the powerful growth factor, but the magic stone also provided synergy. This was their first defeat. Isagi decided that he needed to experiment further, to study different stones and try controlled extraction of magic. Only persistent efforts could produce fertilizer suitable for the soil of Plumina. He looked thoughtfully at the fallen plant, realizing the cost of his mistake. Then, with a smile, he said that the path would be difficult, but they were bound to succeed. At this time, Mercia was already cleaning up the remains of the destructive arugula. She warmly supported his words and promised to be useful in creating fertilizer for her native village. Time passed. It was raining outside, but they continued to work in the workshop. A new number appeared on the second pot, and they planted the arugula seeds again with a different fertilizer composition. However, the result was the same. The plant grew gigantic again. Isagi just sighed, knowing what to do. After dozens of attempts, the 73rd came. Now the arugula grew normally, but suddenly it withered. This struck Isagi in the heart. The next attempt was also disappointing. The pepper produced fruit, but it immediately withered. Mercia became worried. Time passed. Night had already fallen on the village, but they stubbornly did not leave their work. The experiments reached 200. Mercia was sticking new signs, and the pots were lined up tightly. Isagi leaned wearily over the table, drawing out new fertilizer formulas. Sheets of corrections and crumpled paper filled the table. He raised his head with an exhausted smile, not looking at anything in particular. This endless work with Mercia reminded him of his days in the Empire, when they two had worked side by side. Nostalgia gripped his heart for a moment, but he returned to his calculations. They began another experiment. The table was littered with broken pots. They planted sweet pepper seeds again. Mercia carefully watered the soil, while Isagi tensely prepared to intervene with alchemy if something went wrong. The seeds sprouted instantly. This was their 250th experiment. They watched with tension, waiting for a new catastrophe. But the shoot grew straight and correctly. Soon, a healthy bush with juicy pepper fruits stood before them, and the growth stopped just in time. Mercia noted that the stem and leaves looked perfectly normal. It was as reliable as Imperial fertilizer. Isagi, barely believing his eyes, whispered that they had succeeded. With eyes filled with tears of joy, he held up the pot containing the victorious harvest. After 3 weeks of grueling labor, they had finally created the perfect fertilizer. They were able to create fertilizer using only materials from the village, which meant that the problem of scarcity finally disappeared. Isagi happily agreed with her words, his voice loud and confident. Now farming in the village was safe. But suddenly his face darkened. He realized that apart from him there were no alchemists in Plumina, and if something happened to him, production would stop. Mercia then offered to pass the recipe on to the city's alchemists to make the fertilizer, but Isagi doubted that they would be able to do it due to their lack of skill. The girl enthusiastically suggested another solution, to come up with a simplified recipe. But even here, the guy was not sure about the level of the city's alchemists. The room fell silent. Mercia was lost, having still not found the right solution. Isagi silently racked his brains. In the end, they postponed the question. They didn't want to think about the complicated stuff, because the 250th experiment had already yielded results. The next morning, Isagi thanked the girl for breakfast. The vegetables were delicious. She agreed with a smile. The boy took the dirty dishes to the sink while Mercia was washing the plates. He decided to help her and started washing too. She nodded to him gratefully. Isagi noticed that sometimes their work together degenerated into an awkward silence. But strangely, with her, this silence didn't seem burdensome to him. With a slight smile, he continued washing the dishes. Finally, he spoke up, saying that next to her, in such simple household chores, they looked like a married couple. Mercia shuddered, instantly blushing. She turned away, repeating his words with a trembling voice, and began to stammer with excitement, trying to answer. But at that moment, there was a knock on the door. Someone was calling the alchemist Isagi. The guy told her to continue washing, and he himself went to the door. He noticed that the girl looked sullen, her cattail angrily swatting the air. She said in a cold voice that everything was fine. Isagi decided that she simply didn't like washing dishes. Thinking so, he opened the door. A large bag appeared in front of him, but no people were visible. Suddenly, he was called from below. In front of him stood a short girl with a large bag on her back. She was from the beast people race. Isagi realized that she belonged to the canine branch of beastmen. Because of her small stature, he even thought she was a child. However, the girl happily introduced herself. Her name was Konya. She was from the trading company Divovizhna. She had come to him for important negotiations. Isagi was surprised that someone wanted to negotiate with him. Konya confirmed with a smile and asked permission to discuss the matter at his home. The boy agreed and led her to the living room. The girl sincerely apologized for the sudden visit. Konya tried to climb the stairs, but she didn't even take off her huge backpack. This made it difficult for her to get through the door. She stubbornly tried to squeeze through, but Isagi explained that the backpack was too big. In the end, she was forced to leave him outside, laying him alone on the ground. Sitting down on a chair, Konya apologized again and wanted to address Isagi and his companion, but she didn't know the girl's name. A brief silence fell in the room. Konya stared at Mercia, searching for words, but she only received her attentive gaze with surprise. And suddenly Konya asked with genuine surprise if Mercia was his wife. The girl flared up like a flame from the unexpected question. Isagi quickly replied that Mercia was his servant and the daughter of the village headman. She was trembling with emotion. Konya apologized awkwardly, but Mercia said with a happy smile not to worry. Then she stood up and announced that she would make tea for everyone. Isagi noticed the girl humming to herself as she left the room. He was surprised that Mercia was so cheerful, since only a short while ago she had been frowning angrily. The boy was lost in thought. Her mood swings were a mystery to him. A woman's heart remained a mystery. Smiling, Mercia carried the tray into the kitchen. She soon returned with the tea. Konya looked at the drink with delight, and the three of them, Isagi, Mercia, and the guest, spent a few pleasant minutes talking. The dog girl picked up the cup, took a sip, and opened her eyes in surprise. Konya enthusiastically said that the tea had a pleasant bitterness and a soft sweetness at the same time. She immediately asked what it was made of and learned that it was made from wolfberry leaves collected in the forest. Konya happily wrote this down in her notebook. She decided that such a drink could be bought. Isagi was stunned. The girl suddenly took out a notebook and began to jot down notes briskly. While Konya was entering information, Isagi quietly asked Mercia about the amazing company. The girl explained that it was a large and reputable beastman trading company, with its headquarters in the capital and numerous branches. All of its employees were of the dog race. Isagi was even more surprised. It was a real effort, and he didn't understand why someone like Konya had come to him. Meanwhile, the girl closed her notebook and apologized for the delay. She said that recently many amazing, extremely high-quality harvests have appeared on the markets. They grew quickly, were independent of the season, and were much tastier than anything grown before. Their search for the origin of these Konya cultures led them to the village of Plumina. Both Mercia and Isagi understood immediately. It was about their crops. The merchants spread their fame to other villages, so the girl knew that Isagi was the source of this miracle. Her tail wagged vigorously in excitement. But Kanya wondered why other villages, planting the same crops, didn't get the same results. Isagi's answer stunned her. He explained that the cultures were created by alchemy specifically for the soil of Plumina. Such quality is difficult to achieve in other places. For Kanya, it was a revelation. Alchemy was used here not for weapons, but for agriculture. She carefully noted everything in her notebook. Isagi confirmed her guess. Kanya wrote quickly, impressing with her observation and business acumen. Having finished her notes, she closed her notebook and moved on to the main question. She asked directly if Isagi would be willing to sell the crops in bulk to their company. Isagi and Mercia were surprised by the offer. The guy understood that the resources around the village were limited, but cooperation with such a company could provide great advantages. He didn't object, but he put forward conditions. Kanya was curious to hear them. Isagi said that as an alchemist, he needed materials. If he didn't have them, he wouldn't create anything. So he demanded priority supplies of the necessary ingredients. The girl nodded calmly, accepting the condition. She proudly replied that this was not a problem for the amazing company. They could obtain any materials within the animal kingdom. Then Isagi asked about materials from outside the empire. Kanya turned away in embarrassment. She couldn't guarantee that. The questions ran out. Then Kanya asked how much of the harvest they would be able to sell sustainably. Izagui and Mercia were prepared. They had prepared a document with precise yield data. This should have greatly simplified the negotiations. Kanya carefully studied the weekly harvest figures, sliding her finger along the lines of the document. She directly asked how much they would be able to supply regularly, because that was the main question. Mercia confidently replied that with the improved Isagi varieties, there were no obstacles, and the volume of work would always equal the volume of supplies. Kanya was impressed by their dedication to the task. The girl enthusiastically noted that thanks to such speed, it is possible to send batches every week. She immediately asked if it was possible to increase supply volumes to make trade even more profitable. Isagi thought about it. Increasing yields was not easy. After all, their entire workforce consisted of golems and themselves, and exhaustion would leave them without the strength for any other work. The guy thought about how to combine fertilizer production, variety selection, and the creation of magical tools. However, it was still too early for him to fully devote himself to the work of a real farmer. At this point, Kanya suggested a simple solution. Hire people to work in the fields. This would greatly lighten the burden. Isagi and Mercia echoed her words in unison. It took them a few seconds to realize that this was indeed possible. They had never thought about delegation. Isagi wondered how such a simple solution had never occurred to him. Probably because of his habit of working to the point of exhaustion. Mercia called Kanya's idea brilliant. Let Isagi focus on alchemy and let others do the farm work. This would allow for even more new varieties to be bred. The young man clenched his fist, feeling determined. He was determined to act on Kanya's advice. Isagi planned to turn the vacant land into a huge field, a real breakthrough in their business. Kanya suggested turning it into a full-fledged farm. Isagi and Mercia looked at each other again, wondering how this simple thought hadn't occurred to them before. The important thing was that now they knew about it. The three of them sat at a table in the middle of a wide field, and the boy realized that developing an entire farm was a brilliant idea. This will help him not only establish trade, but also develop new crops. He could already imagine growing a lot of vegetables and fruits, and Kanya, how the company Divovizhna would sell them everywhere. The fire of determination and desire for action that shone in Isagi and Kanya's eyes made Mercia a little wary. She already understood the amount of work that lay ahead of them. Kanya extended her hand to Isagi and wished his farm prosperity. From that moment on, the boy was happy about the future collaboration. Mercia was happy too. Now there were even more chances to grow new crops. But Isagi immediately thought about personnel. He considered hiring employees through the company amazing, as this would greatly simplify the work. However, he later decided to first turn to the villagers. If their strength was not enough, then he would seek help from outside. At that moment, Mercia came over and handed him a glass of drink. Isagi asked her if the villagers would volunteer to work if he opened a recruitment drive. This question worried him greatly. After all, the food situation in the village had improved significantly, and the boy didn't know if there would be anyone willing to work on the farm when everyone could already feed themselves. Mercia was sure that people would definitely be found. After all the residents feel deep gratitude to him. He has done too many good things for them and shared his knowledge. Isagi wanted the work on the farm to benefit the peasants themselves. He picked up the warm bowl and felt the warmth warm his hands and with it his heart. The girl looked at him with tenderness and thought that her master truly had a kind heart. She believed that for the sake of profit, it was possible to breed new varieties that had not yet been distributed to the peasants, so that this would be an incentive for them to come to work. It would be great if there were plants that only grow on certain land, and if the peasants could have access to them, they would be happy. Mercia suggested planting fruit trees, apples and bananas, and in a moment, with eyes shining with desire, she enthusiastically said, "We need to plant grapes." Isagi apologized in confusion, explaining that the grapes were still in the development stage. The girl was upset by this news, and the guy realized that she really loved grapes. She didn't answer, only asked to be informed when the work on it would be completed. And Isagi himself thought about starting a real farming business, because they had a lot of work ahead of them and needed a clear structure. He decided to hire 5 employees to start. Profits and volumes were still uncertain, so he wanted to start small to see how things would work. Mercia promised to go to her father and get permission to recruit workers, and she left immediately. Isagi sincerely wished that everything would go smoothly. After all, a large farm is hard work that will require strength from everyone. 5 days had passed since the recruitment announcement. The boy was reading a book when a suffocated Mercia ran into the room with the news. Isagi anxiously asked if anyone had responded to his ad. The girl's response stunned him. There were 10 times more applications than needed. A huge crowd of villagers gathered near his house, wanting to try their hand at a new job and get a chance to work on the farm. The entrance was filled with people, and the crowd was buzzing. The boy and girl didn't even expect such excitement. The first candidate turned out to be their mutual acquaintance. It was Nai, who had also applied. She jokingly said that work was always good, especially when it paid. The girl noticed that there were really a lot of candidates. Isagi honestly admitted that he would like to accept everyone, but he had to make a selection. And then his attention was drawn to Nai herself. She made an expression as cute as a little kitten's and hinted that they were friends, so how could she refuse the job? But instantly Mercia appeared behind her, her gaze too telling. It exuded a cold menace. And for a moment Naya felt awkward. Mercia abruptly announced that everyone would be interviewed without exception, and pushed her friend aside, ordering her to stand in line. Their argument reached Isagi's ears, and the boy felt uncomfortable listening to the girls argue over his work. Isagi had never imagined that there would be so many people willing to work on his farm. This unexpected number of candidates both surprised and pleased him, because now he would definitely be able to assemble a team. It was time to start the interviews. The guy apologized to the people for the long wait and got down to business with concentration. He and Mercia had a tough job ahead of them, as they had to carefully consider every candidate so as not to miss anyone worthy. Isagi listened carefully to everyone who told him about themselves. He caught even the smallest details, because they could be decisive during the selection process. The next day, several people were called back to the farm. They guessed that this meant one thing. They had been accepted. The joy on their faces was sincere and boundless. Only 5 were selected. They were beaming with happiness at having passed the selection, while the others had to return home without work. Nai, hearing this news, rushed to hug Mercia with wild joy. Mercia accepted this manifestation of emotions reluctantly, maintaining restraint, but did not push her away. Isagi asked everyone, even acquaintances, to introduce themselves. He believed this was an important step towards true collaboration. Nai gave her name and said that she had helped her grandfather in the fields. For Isagi, this was a strong argument. Experience was always an advantage. He remembered how skillfully she had helped them with their work in the past. Nai was someone you could really rely on, and she would be able to give sound advice at the right moment. Rhodes, the son of a beekeeper, confidently declared his strength and endurance. He had no experience in agriculture, but he could be trusted with physical labor. Nora said she helped out on her father's large farm and kept accounts in her mother's store. Although she wasn't the strongest, she was good with numbers and suited to the lighter tasks. Ricardo turned out to be a hunter who also grew the seeds he received from Isagi. He was the one who planted the most of them out of all the villagers. The boy already had some idea of farm work. Ragmund had similar experience, so they were almost on par. However, Ragmund hesitated whether to take it at all. After all, at the banquet he allowed himself to say harsh words to Isagi. But that was exactly the reason why the boy wanted to take it. After all, openness and the ability to ask direct questions can be useful. Ragmund finally understood what was going on. He asked permission to continue to ask Isagi direct questions without fear. The boy accepted this directness with respect. Meanwhile, Mercia had brought out rakes, hoes, and sickles. She ordered the new workers to help with the harvest. Naya asked what exactly would have to be harvested. The girl began to read out the list. Tomatoes, cucumbers, eggplants, bell peppers, and Chinese cabbage. And that was just the beginning, because there were many other crops growing on the farm. She didn't have time to finish when Nai exclaimed in surprise, "Isn't this too much for one day?" Mercia calmly explained that this was exactly what their help was needed for. She added that although the work is hard, it is well paid. What's more, they can take part of the harvest for themselves. Placing her hand on Naya's shoulder, Mercia smiled, but the smile was more of a command than a support, as if implying that there was no other choice. All the new employees were impressed by her aura of authority and immediately rushed to work, understanding that she was not to be taken lightly. Mercia approached Isagi and insisted that he focus on his work in the workshop and leave the worries of the field to her. The boy agreed, because he respected her seriousness too much. So the work on the farm began. Everyone took on their assigned duties, as determined during the interview. Mercia explained in detail how to use the tools and made sure everyone was working properly. Everyone listened to the girl's explanation with the utmost attention, interested in every word. Mercia showed Ragmund in detail how to cut and harvest cabbage, he carefully holding the head of cabbage in both hands. Meanwhile, on her way to her place, Nai noticed an apple tree full of fruit. Her eyes lit up, but she felt embarrassed. Mercia was standing next to her, so it was better to hold back, because later everyone would get their share of the harvest. The work in the fields was difficult. Not everyone could keep up with the pace. But for those who had the strength and endurance, the burden did not seem excessive at all. While the newbies were working, Isagi focused on developing new crops in the workshop. The fruits had yet to ripen, so he could now devote more time to research. Strawberries, apples, and bananas have performed well, but larger farms need even more varieties with increased resistance. If things continue at this pace, he will have to expand the workshop. From his thoughts, his gaze fell on Mercia, who was working tirelessly alongside the others in the field. Isagi understood that this girl helped him with everything: the house, the farm, the workshop, even the little things in life. She always worked beyond her means, as if trying to take on too much. Then he remembered her dreamy words about the grapes. She spoke so enthusiastically, as if she had forgotten everything around her for a moment. The guy knew that growing grapes would be difficult and time-consuming, but he decided that he would definitely see the matter through to the end. Isagi stretched his back and took a deep breath, feeling tired. Chaotic stacks of records lay on the workshop tables, a sign that the work had been done thoroughly. He thought that the workers would also wake up soon and get back to work. The first day was difficult for all of them, and the boy wondered how to thank people for their work. Suddenly an idea flashed in my head. He rushed to the cupboard, full of determination, for he still had some time. His plan was to create a magical tool that would make work on the farm easier. Once upon a time, in the castle, in his free hours, he drew plans for such devices. Although most remained sketches, by putting them together, it was possible to create something useful for everyone. The problem remained the lack of materials. Some inventions remained only on paper. But among the old records, he came across a drawing with a description that could become the basis for a new device. At this time, work in the field was momentarily suspended. Ni stretched her arms forward, her face expressing extreme fatigue. She could barely stand on her feet. Everyone gathered in the room, exhausted from a hard day, barely able to speak. Mercia looked at everyone carefully and noted that everyone had really done a good job. Ragmund admitted that he hadn't been this exhausted in a long time, and Ricardo noted that he had worked much harder than on his own field. Rhodes, although he was falling off his feet, was glad that they had managed to gather so many vegetables, and that, in addition to their wages, they would also receive a share of the harvest. Ragmund glanced at Nora. It seemed to him that she was not tired at all, but the girl lowered her head and sighed heavily. In reality, she had no strength left, and she quietly said that she was only holding on to female stubbornness. Her playful laughter sounded bitter and joyless. Working in the fields was too tiring for the fragile girl. The guy entered the room, thanked everyone for their hard work, and invited them to sit down because he wanted to show them something special. The interested workers immediately quieted down and prepared to listen. Isagi held up the cloth-covered object and solemnly announced that it was a gift for his assistants. He was genuinely happy that he could make their workdays a little easier. Everyone stared at the mysterious object in amazement, trying to guess its purpose. Having removed the cover, the guy solemnly presented the test mixer number 1. He was proud of his invention and wanted to show its effect in practice. The workers didn't understand what it was or what it was for, but Isagi explained that it was a magical tool that could radically change the way people think about vegetables and fruits. He explained that at the base of the device was an attributeless magical fragment that, when receiving a flow of power, rotated the upper blades. To the workers, this sounded like incomprehensible witchcraft. Mercia brought a board with chopped fruit and put it in the blender. Isagi added water, channeled some magical power into the device, and focused on the process. The machine rumbled. The blades began to grind the fruit with a furious noise. Naya exclaimed indignantly that they were spoiling precious vegetables and fruits like this, considering it blasphemy. However, the boy could not hear her screams at all over the roar of the device. Only when he handed over the glass with the resulting drink did he ask Naya to calm down and look at the result. The faces of everyone present reflected surprise. Isagi served them their first glass of freshly squeezed apple juice. The workers were amazed. From a few apples and water he created a drink that seemed like a real miracle. When asked who wanted to try, all hands went up at the same time. Tired after their hard work, they eagerly awaited a sip of a refreshing drink. The taste surprised everyone. Juicy apples dripping with sunshine immediately came to mind, and the warmth of summer spread throughout the body. Naya, Rhodes, and Ricardo were delighted. The simple mixture gave an incredible result. The sweetness and freshness won their hearts. Isagi, noticing their joy, winked slyly. He was sincerely glad that his invention was so well received. Suddenly, Nora and Ragmund appeared behind them with empty glasses. They also wanted to taste the miracle. The guy asked to wait a bit because he needed to wash the dishes first. This time he decided to use milk instead of water to make the drink smoother and have a new, unexpected taste. That's how the idea to make strawberry banana milk was born. The drink was so unusual that no one could even imagine its taste. Nora and Ragmund were the first to raise their glasses to their lips. Nora felt the aroma and delicate sweetness of strawberries, which spread through her body in a wave, filling it with happiness. It seemed to her that she was about to rise into the sky. The fatigue instantly receded, and Ragmund, taking a sip, felt as if the drink was giving him strength. Naya, watching everything, admitted that she had never tasted anything so delicious. Ricardo, after drinking his, felt a surge of energy and promised to harvest even more tomorrow than today. Isagi was beaming with happiness. His efforts had paid off, as he was able to give the workers new strength and joy. Naya couldn't resist, and said that the banana milk looked so delicious that she wanted to try it too. Isagi readily agreed, but first he went back to washing the bottle. Mercia listened to their conversation with a soft smile. She was happy to see how easily Isagi found a common language with the workers. She was sincerely happy because she didn't expect anything else from her master, while Isagi himself at first didn't even understand what exactly they were discussing. The girl suggested that the guy was using a cunning tactic, getting people to taste the juicy fruit so that they wouldn't want to run away. She noted that the host was adept at the carrot and stick method. Isagi himself hadn't thought about it, but her words made him think. But in the end, he agreed that it would be great if farm work brought the boys not only fatigue, but also small joys. Mercia shared his opinion, because she saw in this the Lord's concern for his people and completely agreed with his view. Suddenly, Isagi handed her a glass of drink prepared especially for her. He guessed that the girl was also tired and had not yet tasted any of the drinks. The guy held the second glass in his own hand and suggested they try them together before treating the others. It was a completely different drink, born of his imagination and ingenuity, which seemed to know no bounds. Mercia smiled softly and warmly. They touched their glasses and drank it all down in one gulp, marking a difficult but fruitful day. The next clear morning, Mercia asked Isagi, as usual, to inspect the crops and organize the crops. He agreed without hesitation, knowing that she always helped him. A month and a half have passed since the start of joint work with 5 hired workers, and the farm has finally started operating at full capacity, bringing visible results. It grew to incredible proportions. Ordinary fields, medicinal herb plantations, wheat fields, and an orchard. All of this became part of the farm. The farm had now grown to such a size that it could well be called enormous. The number of fields and plots amazed anyone who saw them. Isagi realized that it was now becoming increasingly difficult to make the detour. However, a new idea came to his mind. He asked Mercia to wait a bit, because he needed to implement his plan. The boy explained that, using purified copper, he had created a copper horse, an invention that was indistinguishable from a real animal. In fact, it was a golem, a convenient means of transportation that allowed one to quickly traverse vast fields and save time and energy. The girl sincerely thanked the master, as he had made her work much easier. Isagi decided to later create a second horse, so that they could patrol together. However, there were not enough materials for the second construction. They had to go around on one horse. Mercia was embarrassed by this news, as she didn't dare hold on to the guy during the trip, which looked quite awkward. Isagi seriously warned her that it was dangerous to ride without support, and asked her to hold on tighter. The embarrassed girl, her face flushed, grabbed his jacket and, although she was worried, was at the same time happy at such closeness. Suddenly the boy heard a soft purring behind him and asked in surprise if she was doing that. Mercia turned away and replied that he had imagined it, then rested her head on his shoulder. The guy wondered what that sound was, but decided not to ask further. Riding the copper horse proved to be extremely convenient, as its speed saved them significantly more time than if they had walked around the fields. Isagi and Mercia rode a bronze horse to Rhodes, who was working in the area near the golems. The man was not expecting to see his master, so he greeted them warmly with a good morning. Rhodes always worked conscientiously, giving no reason to doubt his diligence. Isagi explained that he had come to inspect the farm and take care of some matters, so he asked them not to worry. Rhodes understood and did not interfere, and the boy went to the nearest greenhouse. He immediately noted that the Plumina house perfectly maintains the desired temperature. The transparent film and magical devices worked harmoniously, creating the perfect microclimate. The guy thought, sometimes it's worth slowing down the growth of crops, allowing the fruits to ripen naturally. Excessive growth rate harms the quality of the harvest. He carefully inspected each bush, carefully measuring the fruits, as if recording their condition in his own memory. Mercia watched from the sidelines and admired herself. Her master was truly an amazing man. However, when Isagi asked her out loud, the girl became embarrassed, turned away, and said that she had said nothing of the sort. Looking out the greenhouse window, she only thought that creating such a farm in a small village was not something everyone could do. Her husband was an example for others to emulate. After completing the inspection, Isagi said it was time to go to the garden. All the fields had to be carefully inspected to detect possible problems with the vegetables and fruits in time. But suddenly Naya ran up to them, out of breath. She exclaimed in a trembling voice that something bad had happened to the garden, and she couldn't even catch her breath. Without wasting words to explain, the girl gestured for them to follow her. Her haste and desperation were the best proof that the matter was truly urgent. When they arrived, they were met with a horrific sight. The fruits were broken and mutilated. The watermelon rinds were scattered, and the flesh was scattered in pieces all over the field. Isagi and Mercia froze in horror at the sight. They didn't understand how this could happen. Such cases were so exceptional that they could be counted on the fingers of one hand. It looked as if a storm had swept through the field, lifted the fruit, and violently tossed it to the ground. But there was no storm or rain. Isagi asked if there was anything similar yesterday. Naya shook her head. The sky remained clear. There had been no precipitation for a long time. She said that in the evening everything was calm and the harvest was intact. And in the morning they saw this horror. Tears trembled in her eyes from a sense of guilt. The guy asked if the damage had affected other fields. Naya replied that it was only here, but that didn't take the burden off her soul, because the watermelon field itself was under her responsibility. Isagi breathed a sigh of relief. It was a good thing that only the watermelons were affected, because if the disaster had affected all the fields, the damage would have been catastrophic. Naya clenched her fists, trembling with powerlessness. She burst into tears, begging for forgiveness, because she would never have thought that such a disaster would happen under her watch. Isagi could see how worried she was about the loss of the harvest. Mercia immediately took the girl's hands and began to comfort her, explaining that it wasn't her fault. Isagi also agreed. Even if they had been watching at night, it would have been unavoidable. The guy decided to collect the damaged fruits, and the girl supported him. Rotten watermelons, already swarming with insects, were stacked in wooden crates. Isagi bent down, examining the fruit, searching for the cause, and suddenly he noticed deep claw marks on one of them. A little further on, he found paw prints on the ground. The tracks led into the thicket, clearly hinting at wild animals. Now it was clear that it was not a human. Mercia confirmed that she could smell the faint scent of a beast. Everyone understood who was to blame for the destruction of the crops. But it was then that Naya called them to her. She had found something that could finally confirm their suspicions. It turned out that the girl had found a black piece of fur. Isagi assumed that it belonged to a black wolf, a dangerous beast that always forages for food on its own and causes a lot of trouble for people. Naya was surprised that the guy had identified it just by touching the fur. He explained that he knew how to analyze materials and quickly analyzed the find. Mercia assumed that the animals were attracted by the sweet scent of watermelons and had come down from the mountains at night. Naya exclaimed in concern that it might happen again. Mercia coldly replied that it would be so. Just as a bear that has tasted human flesh always returns, so the wolves, having tasted the harvest, will again graze on their fields. Her example sounded eerie, but true. These words frightened Naya even more. She trembled, wondering what to do now. The wild animals were too dangerous, and losing the harvest meant dooming the farm to losses. Isagi understood. The enemy was fast and fierce, and in an open battle on the field the chances would be slim. So he suggested starting from the place where the watermelons were destroyed. The guy asked Naya to call Ragmond and Ricardo to guard the farm, but emphasized that they should not risk their lives. The girl instantly ran away, disappearing into the distance. Meanwhile, Isagi ordered the golems to put all work on hold, and now the main thing was to protect the farm. Together with Mercia, he had to come up with a clear plan, because their future was at stake. The boy saddled the copper horse and followed the tracks of the animals into the forest. Mercia also jumped into the saddle and firmly declared that she would ride with him, because she might be needed at any moment. Isagi warned her that he would speed up the pace, and she had to hold on tight. The girl agreed without hesitation. They were both determined to find out what had caused the crop to die. Deeper into the forest, the boy asked if these tracks were the same ones they had seen in the field. This was important to confirm his suspicions. Mercia confirmed. The footprints led straight into the thicket, and the faint scent of beasts still lingered in the air. There was no doubt left, and suddenly the girl noticed a pack of wild animals racing next to them at great speed. They were so close that neither of them had time to realize how their horses were moving almost alongside the predators. The next moment they realized, they were surrounded on all sides by wild beasts. These were shadow wolves. Isagi realized he was right when he touched a piece of fur in the field. The boy scolds himself. He should have called his friends for help. Now the two of them stood against a pack that was far superior to the man in strength. He quickly asked Mercia if she could handle the shadow wolves. The girl answered uncertainly, but with determination in her eyes. She was ready to defend herself and her master to the last. Isagi realized this enemy was so dangerous that even Mercia was not confident in her abilities. Together they had a chance, but the wolves would not let them easily coordinate attacks. He slowly pulled the gauntlet off, preparing his hand for alchemical techniques. Mercia stood up to him, telling him she would hold back the wolves and he must flee. It was a bold and desperate decision. Isagi froze in shock. He couldn't believe that the girl was willing to be left alone among the pack. His face twisted with anger. He exclaimed that he could not leave her and run away. He knew it was foolish, but as a man he had no right to leave Mercia to its fate. Isagi felt he had no right to run away. He grabbed the girl by the shoulders and reminded her that she had supported him even after he was banished from the Imperial castle. He said that even if he found himself in trouble again, he couldn't leave her. In the most dangerous moments, they had to be together, because that's the only way they would become stronger. Mercia was touched by these words, but the warm moment was broken by a terrifying laugh. The boy and girl looked around sharply, trying to figure out where it was coming from. One of the shadow wolves mockingly said that they were foolish to think they had time for arguments. People were too relaxed to waste it on chatter. Isagi realized that this beast not only understood human language, but also spoke it fluently. Its intelligence was dangerous, but entirely expected for a magical creature. The boy assumed that the wolf was just playing with them. If he didn't attack right away, there was still a chance to make a deal. A desperate plan was born in his head. Isagi loudly exclaimed that he wanted to make a deal. Mercia was stunned. She had no idea he would make such a risky offer. The wolf was even more surprised when he asked if a person really wanted to trade with monsters. No one had ever dared to do such a thing. Isagi confirmed and said that the conversation would be short and profitable. Interested, the beast came down closer and allowed him to speak. His mouth approached the boy. A terrible voice warned. If he got bored, he would tear Isagi apart. But there was no way to retreat. The boy gripped the glove tighter in his hands. He asked if the wolves had really eaten watermelons on his farm last night. The wolf admitted that they had, and was even planning to come get some more food today. Isagi explained that if they destroyed the crop, there would be no more watermelons. The wolf only growled, then they would find other fruits. He was sure that new prey would always appear. But the boy threw up his hands and declared that only he knew how to grow these watermelons. The wolves fell silent, stunned by the news, and the leader frankly did not expect to hear this. Furious, he growled, asking what this man wanted then. If the food source depended on him, wouldn't he demand that the pack be driven out? Isagi shook his head. This was not what he was after at all. He promised to provide the wolves with watermelons and other fruits. But in exchange for this, they must give something in return. The animals listened warily, but curiosity took over. The sweet fruits clearly captured their hearts. And then Isagi put forward a condition. The wolves must guard his farm. The leader of the pack was furious. He roared that the boy had contemptuously compared them to yard dogs. For the proud beast, such a suggestion was an insult. The wolf arched into a fighting stance, ready to charge. Mercia paled, realizing that one careless phrase could cost them everything. However, Isagi calmly explained that it was just a matter of which way to look. From the wolves' point of view, people on the farm are like livestock that constantly provide them with food. His words were logical and based on the beast's own statements. The wolf did not hide his surprise at such thinking. Isagi added that besides watermelons, the farm grew a lot of other delicacies. Now the animals were no longer growling. Their curiosity had grown into real interest. The boy asked about the final decision, and he saw determination flash in the sparkle of their eyes. They longed to have a permanent place where there would always be food. Night fell like a dark curtain. The farm was fully prepared for defense. Workers with tools and weapons stood at the edge of the fields, determined to defend the harvest. Suddenly, Nea noticed a tiny source of light in the distance. Everyone realized that it was Mercia and Isagi returning, and they sighed with relief, rejoicing that they were alive and well after a long absence. The boy apologized for being late, explaining that the golem horse had broken down and they had to walk, but they still reached the village safely. Mercia remained silent. Naya asked anxiously if they were injured. Isagi assured them that everything was fine, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief, feeling happy at their return. The girl cautiously asked if they had managed to tame the black wolves. The boy hesitated and asked to be listened to calmly, but before he could speak, someone impatiently asked if he could leave already. Isagi sternly ordered them to remain silent. He wanted to explain everything himself. The moment was tense, as not everyone was able to accept the alliance of a human with wild monsters. A black ear appeared near his leg. A few seconds later, a large wolf head crawled out of the shadows. The guards froze in horror. No one expected to see a monster so close. Someone shouted that a monster was emerging from Isagi's shadow. The guy held out his hand and asked everyone to calm down, explaining that they first needed to listen to his words and understand the situation. After all, back in the forest, the wolf himself proposed a deal. He warned that if his hunger was not satisfied, the alliance would be immediately broken. Isagi nevertheless accepted the condition. The guy believed that his farm was no less than others, and was capable of feeding even such animals. This confidence made a strong impression on the wolf. Now he saw a reliable source of food for his pack. Ragnant was surprised that such a powerful creature existed near the village, and Ricardo recognized the kindness of Isagi extending a hand even to a monster. Isagi himself was relieved to think that now he could not fear attacks and calmly return to work. The workers understood everything and did not object. It was done for the sake of the farm. But suddenly a loud voice came from his shadow again. "Can we go out now?" Isagi allowed it, and from the darkness of his shadow emerged a huge shadow wolf. The monster shook out its thick fur, straightening its shoulders. The guy immediately suggested discussing the responsibilities again, so that everyone knew the terms of cooperation. He declared that the wolves' job was to guard the farm, especially at night. In return, they would receive fruits and vegetables, but there were other rules. Isagi pondered the volume of the harvest. Here Mercia took the floor, confidently declaring that she would convey everything to the wolf clearly and distinctly. She said that whoever is on duty every day will be well fed, and once every 5 days they will provide food for the entire flock. The wolf found the deal profitable and agreed, impressed by how far people had advanced in agriculture. Then Isagi explained, "In addition to duties, there will be rules. This is necessary so that coexistence is peaceful and comfortable for everyone." The wolf listened attentively as Isagi began to dictate the rules. Not to attack people, not to break things, not to touch the crops without permission, and to protect the workers from other monsters. But the beast impatiently stamped its paw on the ground and interrupted the boy's speech. He growled that his duty was only to protect the farm, and that he did not care about the fate of other people. An unstable mood was quite natural for a wild beast. Isagi calmly countered that without workers, the crops simply wouldn't grow, and therefore, they were an integral part of the farm itself. The wolf, albeit reluctantly, acknowledged the meaning in the boy's words, but honestly warned. He was strong, but not omnipotent, and he would not be able to save everyone. And that was enough. Isagi was satisfied with that answer. The wolf hissed displeasedly. Lowering his muzzle to the ground, he ordered his pack to come out and listen to the final terms. Dark figures crept out of the leader's shadow one by one. The wolves sat before him, listening intently. None objected to the deal. The leader ordered them to follow the rules. Isagi admired their ability to move through the shadows, an ideal trait for defenders. Mercia decided to tell her father and the villagers the news. Isagi politely asked her to do so. But suddenly the wolf turned to him. He asked if they could count on watermelons today. A completely logical request, given the contract they had signed. The boy agreed and led them to the melon. He carefully selected the sweetest fruits to treat his new allies. Asked to wait a few minutes before cutting the ripe berries. Since the wolves took up guard duty, peace has reigned on the farm. The inhabitants no longer fear attacks, and the animals no longer worry about food. Nearly 30 black wolves had joined the guard. The damage from the deer and boars had now been fully repaired, and the cubs were playing carefree in the yard while Mercia gently asked them to stop. She and the leader walked through the village, and the girl was amazed at how the inhabitants stroked the heads of the terrifying beasts, while the latter obediently endured. The wolf muttered that demons always lived in harmony with nature, so the main thing was that people had nothing against their presence. Mercia only smiled, listening to his thoughts. Thanks to the agreement, Isagi could devote more time to research and breeding new varieties without worrying about the safety of the fields. He went down to the basement with a thick notebook in his hands. Dried herbs, fresh greens, and even ores were stored there. Everything necessary for thorough experiments. The guy dreamed of improving yields, so he created an underground research farm where data could be collected for further work. A magical device that accumulated sunlight, provided lighting, and allowed plants to be grown without worries. Experimental cultures were grown here, which often behaved unpredictably. The oak tree proved unstable in growth and nutrition, and the broccoli sucked too much nutrients from the soil. The guy admitted that it was too early to plant them on the farm. He sighed but didn't stop. Before continuing, he checked to see if Mercia was nearby. He didn't want her to know about the surprise. Placing his palm on the wall, he revealed a secret passage. The stone dissolved, revealing a hidden room. And there, under the glow of magical light, hung heavy clusters of grapes with carved leaves, each berry sparkling with mother of pearl and reflecting the rays like a jewel. The bunches of grapes shone so perfectly, as if they had been painted with a master painter's brush. The boy was curious about what their taste would be, but the berries turned out to be sharply sour, and the seeds of different sizes made it difficult to enjoy them. Perfection is not achieved in a few weeks. Isagi knew how difficult it was to maintain a balance between yield and taste, and even considered abandoning mass cultivation. But suddenly I remembered Mercia's shining eyes when she talked about grapes, and I realized that I couldn't back down. After all, this girl has done too much for him, and the best expression of gratitude would be ripe, sweet grapes. But suddenly a voice was heard in the laboratory. He ran out in an instant, and the wall behind him became normal again. He peeked out from behind the shelf. There stood Mercia, who unerringly sensed where the owner was and what he was doing. She looked at him sternly and noticed that he was exhausting himself too much with work. Isagi really didn't notice how quickly time flew by. The girl sighed, her eyes becoming pitiful. She warned that at this rate he might get sick. The guy thought about taking a day off for the first time, but he had no idea what to do on his day off, and here too he needed Mercia's advice. She suggested a picnic in the blooming garden, because the weather is wonderful today. He liked the idea and enthusiastically agreed to start preparing immediately. But it turned out that the girl had already prepared a basket of food. He thought about inviting others, but Mercia had already organized everything. The employees would join after work. Isagi sincerely thanked her for her foresight. Suddenly, a wolf's face peeked out from his shadow, making even him flinch. Kokuro the wolf calmly declared that as a farm worker he also wanted to go on a picnic. The boy was surprised by such a desire, but the beast just turned away, not intending to explain anything. The sun was shining brightly all around. Mercia, Isagi, and Kokuro set off on a picnic, crossing the village, meadows, and forest until they reached a garden. The boy's gaze froze. A sea of flowers spread out before him, and a lonely tree dropped petals to the ground. The girl said softly that they had already arrived. The variety was so endless that it was impossible to list all the species. Isagi had no idea that such a wonder was hidden near the village. He leisurely examined the flowers, and Mercia calmly watched him, rejoicing that the owner had finally allowed himself to rest. The young man realized that he had never known about the existence of such a paradise near Plumina. The boy asked with interest about the names of the flowers, and Mercia, like the proud mistress of the garden, named each plant without hesitation. Isagi was amazed to think that he only knew their composition, but was unable to simply enjoy their beauty. He asked if he could pick a few flowers, and the girl allowed him, although she didn't understand why he needed to do that now. The young man used alchemy, and the white petals shone with a delicate blue. Mercia immediately noticed that Hansan's flower changed color in an instant, and was genuinely surprised. Isagi explained that he simply changed the elemental gradients in the flower. He handed it to Mercia like a gift. Now everything became clear. The girl blushed with surprise, and the wolf, indifferent to human emotions, fell asleep sweetly amidst the fragrance. Isagi suddenly felt hesitant. He apologized, thinking that this gift seemed reckless and inappropriate. His hand with the flower slowly lowered, and the boy sighed, afraid that he was only burdening her. But Mercia unexpectedly took the flower and said that she was extremely pleased to receive this gift. She only mentally remembered that such a gesture had special meaning, but the young man did not know this. Isagi asked in surprise what exactly this meant. The girl turned away and, putting her finger to her lips, smiled mysteriously. "It's a secret." The guy, confused, asked to return the flower, but Mercia confidently refused. It was now her property. She inhaled the scent, enjoying this simple and warm moment. Their tender scene was interrupted by Kokuro, who woke up and hungrily reminded them of the most important thing. It was time to eat. They spread a blanket under a sprawling tree. Mercia opened the basket and announced that there would be sandwiches today. She made sure that the host didn't mind the picnic. Isagi and Kokoro were stunned when they saw the contents. There was a whole mountain of sandwiches of different flavors and types in the basket. The wolf immediately demanded his share. The guy smiled and promised to cut it right away. In the cut, each layer of food looked appetizing and juicy. Everyone started eating with great enthusiasm. Juicy ham, crispy lettuce, sweet tomatoes with a slight sourness made a stunning impression. Isagi was genuinely surprised at how delicious the vegetables grew on his farm. Mercia noted that the crops improved by his hands have a special flavor. Isagi lingered on her sandwich, realizing that the thick slices of tomato and cabbage made it even more appetizing. Kokoro simply chewed without any thought. The wolf wondered if they had accidentally made watermelon sandwiches. Isagi thought in confusion that such a combination was hardly edible, since watermelon is best eaten fresh. Isagi was surprised, finding the idea of watermelon sandwiches too strange, but it turned out that Mercia had prepared some. Sweet sandwiches with watermelon and yogurt, as well as the classic version with salty cheese, looked surprisingly appetizing. This unexpectedly seemed like a delicious combination. Mercia smiled and asked if Mr. Isagi wanted to try it, and the boy agreed, while the wolf was already nibbling on his favorite pieces of watermelon. After biting into the sandwich, he realized that the sweet freshness of the watermelon and the sourness of the yogurt created an incredibly pleasant taste. He admitted that he had never liked the capital's cloying delicacies, but this watermelon version turned out to be especially successful thanks to Mercia's efforts. The boy thanked him for the treat, saying that it was indeed very tasty. Nearby, the wolf was already dozing, licking his lips sweetly after his meal. Kokoro grumbled that it was only because of the watermelon that it tasted so good. But Isagi confidently replied that only Mercia could make him so special. The girl blushed in embarrassment at these words. The guy took a second sandwich, this time a classic flavor, and she silently watched him with a sincere smile. They rested under a tree, enjoying a rare moment of peace. Suddenly, a girl appeared in the field and waved to them, letting them know that the rest of them had also finished their work and were in a hurry to rest. It was Naya with all the other workers, all tired but very hungry. They were on their way to try Mercia's sandwiches too. Isagi was glad that the work was completed, but Mercia thought differently. She would have liked the time with her master to last longer. When he asked in surprise, she just smiled and advised him to spread the blanket wider. The workers joined them, filled with happiness from such a vacation. Kanya from the Chamber of Commerce greeted us with a friendly, "Good morning," and everyone responded in a friendly manner. Isagi noticed that she was buying up the harvest again, to which the girl confirmed and thanked him, pointing to the boxes of vegetables. She saw a huge number of boxes and barrels and beamed with joy. Now she had even more goods to sell. Kanya gave the order, and her men began to quickly load everything onto carts. But suddenly her expression changed, which Isagi noticed immediately. She said that she had learned about the demonic guardians in a letter from Mercia. The boy confirmed, explaining that they were shadowy black wolves, and suggested that they be summoned. He waved his hand, and one of the shadow wolves came up to them. Kanya exclaimed in delight that they were cute, but still asked if she could pet it. But as soon as she reached out her hand, the hat instantly flew off her head. The wolf, clutching his hat in his teeth, playfully jumped aside and looked at the girl, as if showing off a new toy. Kanya grabbed her head and ran after it with a scream, because it was her favorite hat. Before she could catch up, she fell face down on the ground, and the wolf melted into the shadows, leaving only a mocking voice. "You won't catch me that easily!" Ch! And then Kokoro appeared from Isagi's shadow, holding his hat in his teeth and apologizing. At that moment, Kanya, with a cry of joy, jumped on him and clung to his thick fur. Kokoro couldn't even move while Kanya clung to him and shouted for him to give up his hat, and only when the wolf promised to fulfill her demand if she stopped screaming in his ear did the situation calm down a bit. Suddenly, Isagi switched the conversation and asked Kanya if it was possible to increase the volume of trade by at least 1.5 times, and the girl admitted that it was a really interesting proposal. However, given the number of carts and limited warehouses, this is almost impossible now, although she immediately guessed that the guy had a huge surplus of harvest, which he had nowhere to store. So she suggested going to the city and selling the surplus vegetables and fruits there. For the boy, it was the first time he had heard of such a possibility, and Kanya explained that there was a town called Milan, located just a day's journey away, and he immediately remembered that it was there that he and Mercia had stopped when they were heading to the village. Milan was the closest town to their settlement and quite lively, as it had a free market where, having paid for a place, one could trade without restrictions. This way, Isagi would be able to sell his harvest, and Kanya was certain that with his quality, the fruits would sell out quickly. Mercia was surprised by this news, but she really liked the idea, because she had been thinking about buying various household goods for a long time. However, Naya immediately announced that she wanted to go too, and Mercia sternly asked why. But it turned out that the girl wanted everyone to know how delicious their farm's harvest was, and she believed that only she was capable of doing such advertising. The guy smiled and asked the real reason. And then Naya, without holding back, admitted that she had been working hard and wanted to get out into the city at least sometimes to have some fun, and in a moment she realized that she had betrayed her true intentions. Isagi immediately realized that he had caught the girl, and although the advertisement was just an excuse, her desire to go beyond the village was also important. Mercia reminded them that they were going to the city not for fun, but for business purposes. But Naya just shrugged it off, saying that there was no difference. The main thing was to see something new. Finally, both of them stared at the guy, waiting for a decision, and he allowed Naya to leave with them, after which she instantly rushed to pack her things. Mercia quietly remarked that he probably took her because they were childhood friends, but Isagi objected, saying that he and Mercia would handle the sales and Naya would serve the customers. Hearing this, Mercia agreed and promised to work as best she could, and Naya got the role of assistant at the market, which made her extremely happy. She ran out in a short shirt and shorts, beaming with joy, because she had been waiting for a long time for the opportunity to escape into the city. On the way, she jokingly asked why Mercia never wore anything nice, and she explained that she worked all the time and simply couldn't, although sometimes she wanted to. Naya sighed that this was boring, because without a doubt, Mercia would be surprisingly beautiful if she paid a little attention to it. The girl impatiently urged Isagi on, reminding him that if they left now, they would be back before nightfall, and he agreed, calculating that thanks to the homunculus horses, the journey would only take 3 hours. Mercia instantly flushed, remembering their last trip, when she had to sit so close to him, and buried her face in her hands to hide her blush. This time there were 3 horses, enough for everyone, because the boy had enough materials to create them, and Naya was beaming with happiness at having her own. Isagi admitted that he had recently obtained new metals, in particular copper, needed for horses, and that this was what helped to make the transport so quickly. But, noticing Mercia's gloomy expression, he was surprised by her mood, not realizing that she dreamed of riding the same horse with him again. Without changing her face, she nevertheless mounted and dryly called for the departure, and the boy decided that she simply did not like the appearance of the horses. They set off and galloped across the wide fields, and Naya was wildly happy about her freedom and even cried out with happiness, finally getting the chance to truly experience the journey. When she was the first to shout that she could already see the city, Isagi was also happy, because the tops of the buildings could be seen beyond the walls. They rode through the majestic archway with the stream of people, and Mercia deftly dismounted to continue on foot. The city was crowded. Many people and magical creatures were bustling through the streets, and Naya was interested in almost everyone she met, while Isagi admitted that Melon was truly huge. They stopped at another archway that led to the center, and saw a whole host of merchants who had gathered here to sell their goods. Naya guessed that this was the boy's first time here, but Isagi explained that he had been to Melena before, but he had been busy with business and hadn't had a chance to look around. Now Naya was glad that today they could take their time and take a good look at everything, and the guy agreed because it was time for both shopping and getting to know the city. But first the boy needed to sell his harvest and earn money, and Naya was eager to help Isaga and Mercia with this task. But suddenly both of them froze, noticing something interesting in the crowd. Mercia stood there, gazing mesmerized at the windows of opulent jewelry. The precious stones shone in the sun, as if calling out with their brilliance, and the thin chains radiated a sense of lightness and elegance. Isagi remembered a time when the girl had also shown interest in similar things before, and now he asked if she really liked this piece of jewelry. But Mercia began to brush it off, assuring her that this was not the case at all. The guy understood perfectly well that the girl was fascinated by this, and that she was unsuccessful in hiding her emotions, so he decided to give her a gift after work and arrange a small pleasant surprise. Soon they reached the market, where a chaos of goods reigned between the rows of tents. After paying for a place, Isagi was given the right to set up his own tent and put his harvest up for sale. The guy was proud of how neatly he arranged the vegetables and fruits in the boxes and on the shelves. But Naya, grimacing, admitted that this presentation did not attract customers at all. She thought that simply displaying the harvest looked too ordinary, even if the fruit was delicious. But Mercia and Isagi were convinced that their simplicity only emphasized the quality of the products. Naya sighed impatiently and explained that buyers didn't know the taste of their fruit, so they had to immediately attract attention with a beautiful presentation. Otherwise, their product would go unnoticed. Isagi and Mercia were surprised by her words. It seemed like they were really thinking about it for the first time. Then the girl set out to show how everything could be changed. She carefully went through the boxes of fruits and vegetables, and then suggested that, in addition to fresh fruit, they also make juice, especially since Isagi had a magic blender with him. She also thought it would be a good idea to serve the food in beautiful containers, rather than simple boxes. And that's where the wicker baskets from the village that Mercia brought came in handy. Naya quickly picked up some fruits and arranged them in a basket, creating a colorful arrangement. Hisagi and Mercia watched her work with interest. The finished set looked worth at least 3 silver coins. The composition turned out so beautiful that it was perfect as a gift or a souvenir. Naya looked at the result with pride and looked forward to the first buyers, while the guy wondered if anyone would really want to buy something like this.